Two universes, one filled with evil, flashing sparks of bloodlust all around, the other filled with a balance of good and evil, but evil nonetheless. A new start for an innocent family in the small towns of Hawkins, Indiana. With a small fortune, Victor Creel had tried moving away from not only his recurring thoughts of the Second World War, but of his old life. A new start indeed, with his wife Virginia and two kids, Alice and Henry. There was something different about Henry though. He had a sense, some form of sense beyond our understanding. He never fit in with anyone. He was a sensitive child. Teachers and doctors described him as broken. Were they really so far off? After moving, Henry knew that it would be nothing different here than anywhere. He would be treated the exact same. One day he creates a bond and finds comfort in something others usually fear. A nest of black widow spiders hiding within the bathroom vent. The apparent misunderstood and most important of the predators, providing structure for the weak. Henry grew this hatred, this hate of humans. Specifically the civilization's structure of time and evolution. Eat, sleep, work, reproduce, then die. But he was able to control and connect to his unheard of sense. Realizing he didn't have to be a part of society's mindless play. He began to learn about his abilities, telekinesis, seeing into others' memories, creating hallucinations, and more. He tested these abilities on wildlife such as telekinesis on rabbits and other animals. He caused his father to hallucinate parts of his traumatic memories, such as a baby burning in a cradle, a memory from the war where he ordered the shelling of a building, thinking there were German soldiers inside, only to find himself horribly wrong. He would scare Virginia with spiders crawling out the drain, and give Alice horrific nightmares. They thought it was a demon's doing. Well, Victor did. Virginia, however, thought her son was somehow doing these things. She somehow knew. She wanted to send him to a doctor, but nothing really came of it. But one fateful night, Henry decided to make his next move. While the four ate dinner, the radio glitched randomly. Victor got up to fix it until the lights above started to flicker. No one knew what was going on, that is, no one besides Henry. Virginia was lifted up into the air quickly. Crack, snap, and crack. Eyes burst, she falls down to the kitchen table as Henry's nose bleeds from the use of his power. Victor picks him up as they begin to run away from the house. Victor tries to slam the door open to free his children, only to be sent back to that cold day. He was back in that building, seeing and hearing that baby cry in that cradle all over again.
Dream a little dreamer.
He snapped out of his hallucination, his nightmare, only to turn around into a nightmare far worse. His daughter's eyes burst, bones cracked, and Henry himself on the floor bleeding out of his nose after knocking himself out, almost killing himself using too much of his power. He didn't quite know his limits. Shortly after, the police came to the house, arresting Victor for the murder of his own family. He took an insanity plea, leading him to be put into Penhurst Asylum. There, with nothing else left in his life, he comes up with a decision. An attempt at suicide. To cut his own eyes out himself and to join his family. But the people at Penhurst Asylum caused him to fail. Patches stopping the bleeding, causing him to live permanently blind, sitting in the dark rooms of Penhurst Asylum for the rest of his years. But Henry wakes up slowly from his coma caused by the massacre, only to see Dr. Martin Brenner. Dr. Brenner was a part of a program named MK Ultra, a program designed to study and develop mind control, with operations taking place in Hawkins National Laboratory. And Henry was someone he was interested in testing on, someone his mother had mentioned to him in the past. Dr. Brenner takes him, somehow convincing everyone Henry died shortly after reawakening. He creates a device called Soteria to suppress Henry's abilities, not just his supernatural, but his literal ability to escape the lab. Dr. Brenner tattoos a designated number onto Henry, 001, beginning to include other students into the program, 002, 003, 004, and so on. He wanted to create these powers from scratch, and so he gave Henry the alias of Peter Ballard, to become an orderly for the children within the Rainbow Room, a place to play around, testing powers on games, and more. In 1969, a woman by the name Terry Ives took part in MK Ultra under the supervision of Dr. Brenner. She was experimented on, mostly with the intake of mind-altering psychedelic drugs, but throughout her time in these experiments, she was unknowingly pregnant to her husband Andrew, who unfortunately died in the Vietnam War. Terry went into labor with Jane Ives in June 1971, but Dr. Brenner kidnapped Jane so he could experiment on her. He covered it all up with a miscarriage in the third trimester, but Terry saw and heard the baby's life. So when she woke up to her sister Becky telling her that she's sorry for the miscarriage, she didn't believe it. She tries to get up and find him but gets put to sleep. But in 1974, Terry planned to return to her baby. She was going to take Jane back by force with a gun she kept in a safe. She went into the lab and after being asked for a badge, knowing she didn't have one, she aimed the gun at a security guard. She saw him reach for his gun and shot him. Terry went into every room she could until she saw a room with a rainbow on it, the Rainbow Room. She opened it and saw Jane and Carly, who was 8, playing in there. And as her child was finally in arm's reach, Terry was grabbed and pulled out by the guards. She was strapped down and forced by Dr. Brenner into a platonic state, turning her mind to mesh but keeping her alive. From then on, she would only know the words breathe, sunflower, rainbow, 3 to the right, 4 to the left, 450, with Becky becoming her personal caregiver. During the security breach within the lab and the Rainbow Room being breached itself, it seems as though 8 had miraculously escaped as well. 1979 was an important year for the town of Hawkins, and most importantly 11. Throughout the years, the numbers had been practicing how to do different things. For example, one thing they practiced was controlling lights with their mind. But throughout all these years and throughout all these practices, there was one common theme throughout them all. 11 would be the subject of bullying from the other numbers. They'd call her weak as she didn't progress as fast as the others. There was a catalyst of events that occurred this year, beginning with Peter talking to 11 about 1, and how he truly does exist no matter what Dr. Brenner says. Peter also mentions that Dr. Brenner, who the numbers call Papa, lies sometimes. He tells 11 stories about 1 and how he was able to use memories from his past that made him sad, but also angry, to help him find his strength. He asks 11 if she has a memory like that, and with no response, he mentions the strange woman that came to her one day, calling her Jane, who he reveals to 11 is her mother Terry, who she thought died giving birth. She realizes that maybe Papa lies after all. After that, all the numbers play a game, another training activity, to stay in the circle drawn for the 2 numbers competing. The last person standing in the circle after all the numbers gets an extra hour of free time in the Rainbow Room. The first round was 2 against 6, and 2-1, then 2 against 5, 2-1, next 2-1, over and over and over, until it was 2 against 11. After Peter wishes her good luck, which makes Dr. Brenner suspicious, they begin. They seem pretty tight until 2 pushes 11 back, but she holds her ground. Dr. Brenner told everyone earlier not to use emotions as it will make them fail, which contradicts what Peter said to 11 earlier, but luckily she knows that Papa lies. She thinks about Terry, the only time she would ever see her mother in her entire life. This makes her sad and angry. She finds and controls her strength and pushes 2 out of the circle, winning the round. Dr. Brenner is now convinced Peter said something to help her, which during 11's hour of playtime in the Rainbow Room, he punishes Peter for. 11 sees him being punished and returns back to the Rainbow Room to avoid getting caught, but unknowingly to her, the other numbers are awaiting her arrival. 11 had embarrassed 2 in front of Papa. He was extremely mad. The cameras were turned off. This was happening after hours. 4 of the numbers used their mind to push 11 around the room, bullying her with their powers. After threatening 11 to never tell Papa about this, the other numbers returned to their rooms. The next day, Dr. Brennan knows something happened and checks up on 11, and she stays true to the threat and tells Papa that she can't remember what happened. He gets all the numbers to line up to teach them about rules, the rules which Dr. Brennan knows were broken. Someone caused 11 a concussion. 2 makes the mistake, deciding to speak, calling 11 clumsy and stupid and that she must have just fallen. Papa makes 2 step forward and they collar him. He gives him a lecture about his rights and how the rules are the exact same as everyone else's and all apply the exact same. Papa shocks 2 to get a confession out of him, yet he keeps lying. Eventually, the numbers are sent back to the Rainbow Room and 11 continues to play her game by herself. The 3 numbers who helped 2 attack the other night stare at her. They are all angry that she technically caused 2 to get shocked and hurt. They mess up her chips, yet Peter intervenes by picking up 1 himself. He offers to play chess with her instead. He tells 11 not to change emotions no matter what he tells her because the cameras are always watching. He goes on to explain that 2 is doing fine and recovering, but as soon as he's released, he and his friends are going to try and kill her in the Rainbow Room, and that Papa will allow it to happen. That he's been setting it up in multiple ways. 11 is more powerful than the others, and Papa can't control her, which makes him frightened of her. He tells her that she needs to escape today, and passes her a card to get through the doors. Sometime later, all the numbers are still playing games. Dr. Brennan walks in after some time and asks 10 if he's up for some lessons. 10 uses a magic 8-ball to tell him yes, and so he grabs 10 away. This is her opportunity. She goes to the guard and tells him she's been feeling sick, so he takes her to the nurse who's currently treating 2, and tells her about 11 feeling sick, but as soon as he turns to face her, she's nowhere to be seen. 11 escapes into the saws, and after reuniting with Peter, she plans to climb through the saws which lead into the woods. After Peter reveals that he cannot go with her because of the device that weakens and tracks him, she says she can help him by pulling it out with her powers. He helped her after all. He deserves help from her. And she does exactly that, pulling Soterio right out of his body, which reawakens his true powers. Before they can begin to crawl away, guards find them and so they run away until they're cornered by the armed guards. Peter tells 11 that she doesn't have to be afraid of them anymore, as he shows her his true self. Henry's true power, 1's true power, and he takes out all of the guards. He takes her into a supply closet and after showing her his 001 tattoo, tells her to stay put. She hears the alarms ring. She cannot stay put. She goes outside and hears on the dead guard's radio people screaming and yelling. Something is wrong here. She walks around the lab and sees dead bodies everywhere, not just of staff, but of the numbers. All the numbers are dead. She walks into the rainbow room and watches as one kills two with his mind. She attempts to run away, but he turns around and forces her to stay in the room with him. He talks over what happened in his past, the Creel House massacre, the creation of all the numbers, and more. One offers for 11 to join and escape with him, to help reshape and remake the world to make it better. But surrounded by the dead bodies of all her brothers and sisters, and previously seeing Papa on the floor, she uses her strength to say no and push one all the way to the wall. He gets up and they ready themselves to duel. A duel between two minds, a duel between 1 and 11, a duel between Henry and Jane. 11 tries to use the memory of her mother again to feel sad and angry to overpower him, but he pushes her down and around the room, eventually pushing her off the ground and doing what he did to his mother so many years ago. 11 remembers her birth, hearing her mother's voice, her mother's love, and she uses all the strength left in her to push one away and free herself from him. She continues to think about all the murdered children, all those innocent souls like herself, lives taken away, and she uses all the strength in her body, all the power in her mind, everything she has, and pushes one not through the wall, but through a gateway between dimensions, a gate into the upside down. The gate shuts and closes itself in. Dr. Brenner walks into the rainbow room with the gate now shut. He asks 11 what she's done, but 11 can't focus and faints. By using too much of her power, she's sent into a coma, losing her memories, including her speech skills. Dr. Brenner sees the videotapes and learns what happened to 11 and Henry. Henry falls through the landscape of the Upside Down, being hit by the lightning that surrounds its plane. He explores this new realm, seeing monsters running around. As he continues exploring, he sees a giant cloud of particles, a shadow that connects everything in the Upside Down, and he uses his powers on it, making it take a new form, a form of something he was obsessed with as a child, a form of a giant spider. This is his first of many changes to this plane, as Henry has no plans of dying so easily. Jim Hopper and his wife Diane Hopper had a daughter named Sarah. They ran around the park playing around until she began to hyperventilate. Hopper tried to calm her down, but sometime later it was discovered that she was diagnosed with cancer. She lost her hair and had to stay in hospital. Jim would keep a straight face for his daughter, but at the stairs close by he'd cry knowing what's gonna happen to her. The cancer consumed her and caused the death of Sarah. Jim believes the cancer was caused by a squadron coming in contact with Agent Orange during the Vietnam War when he was 18. Mostly because after coming home, he and his co-workers would try and live normal lives and set up normal families, only for their children to be stillborn or born with deformities. After a while, Jim and Diane split up and Hopper moved from the big city and returned back to his old town, Hawkins. Within Hawkins, in 1982, Hopper's old school friend Joyce gets a divorce with her husband, Lonnie Byers. Lonnie moving away to Indianapolis and Joyce raising her two sons, Will Byers and Jonathan Byers, on her own, with Lonnie never coming to events and always making excuses. Back in Hawkins' lab, 11 is breaking Coca-Cola cans. Slowly but surely, she's regaining her powers. Over time, they've been training her to become as powerful as she possibly can be. On occasion, she shows brief proof of this, such as when she kills two guards with her powers, or when she's able to listen to a conversation happening in a different room of the lab. As always, Dr. Brenner wants to push her to her limits. He puts her inside of a sensory deprivation tank to spy on someone far away from Hawkins, to spy on a Russian agent from the KGB to gain any form of information. But while inside the void, she loses contact with a Russian agent, only to find herself finding contact with something else. A monster growls at 11, and out of fear she runs away from the sound, begging the scientist to let her out. November 6, 1983, a day that will never be forgotten. Dr. Brenner sends 11 back into the tank to make contact with the monster, telling her the monster cannot hurt her from where wherever it is, that the monster is calling to her and wants her, so she reluctantly agrees and ventures into the void. She sees the monster and walks up to it slowly. She attempts to touch it, to make contact, and contact was made indeed. The monster screamed at Eleven, and out of fear she returned to reality, screaming her head off. Eleven uses her powers to accidentally open a gate to the Upside Down like she did years ago. This permanent gate opening has a major effect on the Upside Down, but without a moment's notice the lab descends into chaos as the monster enters through the gate, killing multiple people. Although amongst all the chaos, in a rush of adrenaline, Eleven is able to escape the lab through the pipes which Henry advised her about years ago. The monster also escapes the lab. Mike Wheeler, Dustin Henderson, Lucas Sinclair, and Will Byers are all playing Dungeons and Dragons in Mike's basement. They're all fighting their Demogorgon. Will has to make a decision between a protective spell or an offensive fireball. He chooses fireball but rolls the dice off the table. While the others look for the dice, Karen, Mike's mother, and Ted, his father, tell them it's time to pack it up and for his friends to go home as it's a school night. Will eventually finds the dice and it was a 7, which was a miss. Lucas tells him to lie to Mike about it as Dustin goes to give Nancy, Mike's sister, leftover pizza, to which she completely ignores him. Besides Mike, they all agree Nancy's changed after beginning to date Steve Harrington. When Dustin and Lucas leave, Will tells Mike alone that he truthfully missed and that the Demogorgon got Will. He leaves as the light flickers behind him. They all split off as they ride home, but as Will rides past the lab, his lights flicker and turns off itself. When the lights fix, Will looks back up on the road and sees a tall, shadowy figure turn to him. Will crashes his bike in the woods on the side of the road, and as he hears the monster growl from the street, he runs away through the woods, all the way home. Will locks the door behind him and yells around the house, wondering where Joyce and Jonathan are. He looks outside his windows only to see the figure followed him all the way home. He goes to ring the police, but the phone line is jammed and staticky. He only hears the slight growl of the monster. He looks at the door and sees the figure appear as it growls, opening the door on its own. Will drops the phone and runs outside to his shed where he knows the gun is. He scrambles to put bullets inside of the gun, and after loading it, he aims it at the door. The monster growls as it appears behind him. Will turns around and is frozen in fear when he sees the monster as the light brightens. The Demogorgon takes Will into the Upside Down. The next morning, Joyce and Jonathan realize Will didn't come home last night. She calls Karen to see if he stayed the night, but she denies this. She goes to the police station to report her son is missing. Hopper tells her not to worry, as 99% of the time, a missing child is with a parent or a relative. Hopper tells her to go and contact Lonnie, and Joyce asks that he just finds Will. Meanwhile, within Hawkins' lab, they shut off the entire east wing of the lab, quarantining and evacuating it. Dr. Brenner and other scientists investigate the area and find that the gate into the Upside Down is spreading into the lab, and they still don't know where 11 is. The missing 11 wanders the woods and walks into Benny's Burgers. She sneaks into the kitchen, eating some fries that were for other guests, but as Benny Hammond was returning from serving other customers, he sees her eating and runs in to catch her. But when he does, he realizes not only is it a girl unlike he thought, but she also has a shaved head and looked pretty beaten up. He cooks her a burger and asks her a few questions, especially due to how quickly she was munching down the food. Benny goes and calls social services about it, thinking she's either abused or kidnapped or something as such. But someone else was listening to the call and got 11's exact location. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas use a device called the Heathkit Ham Shack. Mr. Clark tells them that it can communicate to other parts of the world, such as Australia. While they're all having fun, they hear a knock at the door. Hopper interrupts as he grabs the other boys to talk to them about Will. They tell him that he might have gone down in Mirkwood. The three of them ask to help look for Will with the police, but Hopper shuts them down instantly and says they need to go home and don't go investigating on their own. Hopper and his team search the road they were talking about, and down the road's hill they find Will's bike abandoned. They go to the buyer's home to show Joyce the bike they found, and they begin investigating the house. Hopper goes and investigates their shed, turning their lights on and looking around. He sees the bullet pack open with a fuse spilling out of it. The lights break and he hears slimy movement coming from a cornered spot in the shed. He alerts the others to go and begin a search party. Jonathan and Joyce prepare missing persons posters, and Jonathan blames himself for not being there for Will. Joyce tells him that he's not to blame and for him not to do that to himself. They get a phone call and she hears only breathing and growling until she's electrocuted by the phone. Later in the day, Agent Connie Fraser arrives at Benny's. She acts as social services and shoots Benny dead. 11 runs out and the two guards come to stop her, but she kills them both as she runs wild into the woods. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas go and search for Will in the woods on their own, even after being told not to. They keep searching until they hear rustling in the woods and run into 11. They sneak 11 into Mike's basement, and after giving her some clothes for her to change into, 11 shows him her 011 tattoo and reveals that's her name, Mike nicknaming her L. After searching for Will the entire night, the police and volunteers still have no clues. Hopper arrives at the buyers and she tells them about the burned phone. Joyce tells him that she heard breathing, and not just any breathing, but Will's breathing. Hopper decides to go to Lonnie's because Joyce didn't hear from him. Jonathan also tries to go, but Hopper tells him to stay put. They all continue their search throughout the day. Mike goes to check on Eleven and give her some food. He tries to get her to go to the front and talk to his mom so they can get proper help, but Eleven says she doesn't want his mom to help, that she's in trouble with bad men who want to kill her, and will kill him as well if found. His mom yells as he has to rush to school. Jonathan hangs the missing posters at Hawkins High School, and after Steve and his friends give him a stare, Nancy goes over to him and apologizes for everything. Jonathan leaves the school and travels away from Hawkins to his father to hopefully find Will. Dustin and Lucas realize Mike isn't there at school today, hoping his plan didn't fail. Mike ended up sneaking home after his mom left so he can stay with Eleven. Eleven explores his house, and eventually they get to Mike's room where she sees an image of Will and seems concerned. Karen arrives home early and hears Mike. He puts Eleven in the closet before Karen finds her. Mike lies about feeling sick today, and Karen thinks he stayed home because of things going on with Will, that she's not upset with him staying home. After school, Dustin and Lucas come over and are confused why Eleven's even still there, and they all argue. Lucas suggests going to Mike's mum, but Mike tells him they might die if they do. But before Lucas can get out of the room and tell Karen about her, Eleven uses her telekinesis powers to slam the door shut forcefully. Agents from Hawkins' lab heard the call to the police about the burnt phone and go to the buyer's home covering as Hawkins' power and light. But with none of the buyers home, they investigate the shed where they find material from the Upside Down. They know the Demogorgon is loose and might have taken Will. The police find Benny dead in his diner and it's been staged to look like a suicide. Hopper goes and interviews one of Benny's friends. With the information he gives, Hopper thinks that Benny's friend saw Will at Benny's, and at night they get the police to look around Benny's. And Mr. Clark finds a piece of clothing in a tunnel that leads directly into Hawkins' lab. But earlier in the day and outside of Hawkins, Jonathan eventually arrived at Lonnie's, and Lonnie doesn't know where Will is either. Jonathan drives back home and searches the woods himself while taking photos. On the other side of the woods, Nancy and Barbara go to Steve's night party while his parents are away, and while they're all having a fun time, Barb accidentally cuts her hand on a can and she goes to Steve's bathroom. The rest party in the pool and scream having fun, which alerts Jonathan, who runs over thinking something's wrong. After the pool, Steve's friends go to his mum's room. Nancy goes upstairs with Steve and on her way up tells Barb to kindly go home. Upstairs, Steve gives Nancy clean clothes and eventually they kiss and begin to have sex. Barb, however, goes to sit outside, bleeding into the pool. Jonathan takes pictures of all these events, but while his camera reloads, Barb is taken into the Upside Down. Barb is chased by the monster in the Upside Down until she's caught and dragged into the pool. Back in Mike's basement, Eleven figures out which piece is Will's. She flicks the Dungeons and Dragons board upside down and places the Demogorgon piece on the board to demonstrate that he's hiding in the Upside Down and the Demogorgon is after him. They all plan to go and find the Upside Down as well as the Demogorgon. At night, Joyce's phone goes off and she hears breathing again. The lights begin flickering when he says Mom. The phone electrocutes again, but the lights flicker at specific points in the house, creating a path to Will's room. Should I stay or should I go begins playing from Will's room. The lights flicker and intensify, only for everything to suddenly turn off and for the Demogorgon to stretch out of the wallpaper. Joyce runs outside of her house, but before driving away she hears the song come back on as well as the lights beginning to flicker more, so she gets out of her car and begins to walk back inside. Hopper and Officers Powell and Callahan investigate at Hawkins' lab, looking through the other side of the pipe, and after reviewing videotape footage discover that the employees are lying to them. The videotape they played to the police about that night, as proof Will wasn't there, had no rain whatsoever, but the night of the search there was rain. They go to the library where they discover the incident that happened with Terry Ives, but also that Dr. Brenner was involved in Project MK Ultra. Hopper thinks the piece of clothing from the hospital gown might belong to Will, and they might have gotten Will a part of it. He might have seen something that he shouldn't have, and been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Joyce hangs Christmas lights all over her house. Karen and Holly come to check up on Joyce, and while Joyce and Karen are talking, Holly sees the lights flicker and follows them to Will's room, only to see something come out of the walls. When Joyce picks her up and realizes she saw something in the walls, she kicks Karen out the house. Nancy went home sometime last night and discovered that Barb is missing when she's not at school the next day. Nancy has been looking for Barb all day, and when she goes to find Steve, she sees them picking on Jonathan. Jonathan is revealed to have taken pictures of the party and specifically Nancy. Steve grabs his photos and rips them up, and then he breaks the camera right in front of him. Nancy sees the photo of Barb and grabs more of the photo pieces, planning to put them all together just in case. During school, she goes to Steve's house to find Barb. She finds her car still there, empty. She goes into the woods to search for her, but is scared away from a strange noise and a figure running around. She goes straight home and tells her mum something bad might have happened to Barb. Eleven meets the boys outside of Mike's house at 3:15 like they planned. They walk in the woods and end up at Will's house. Eleven claims that he is hiding there, but they stop their search when they see a bunch of officers and ambulances heading down the road. So they get back on their bikes and follow them all the way to the quarry. A body that's claimed to be Will's is found there. The boys 11 and Hopper all watch this unfold in front of their eyes. Mike gets super annoyed at 11, thinking that she's lied to them about Will being alive. Annoyed, Mike rides off all the way home to hug his mum. Will tells Joyce using lights that he's alive, but not safe. Knowing that he can communicate with the lights, she begins to write the alphabet on the wall so that he can use it to say 4 words. He tells her through the lights that he's right here, but when she asks what to do, he tells her to run. When she realizes what the message is, the Demogorgon breaks through the wallpaper again, this time fully. She sees the faceless creature and runs out the house. She runs into Jonathan and they exchange a hug while the police are coming down the road to tell her the news. The police look around the house after Joyce tells them about the monster in the walls. She claims that the body is not Will's. She tells them about the monster she saw, the animal that looked human but without a face. After the police leave, she goes to the shed and grabs an axe, sitting on the couch, awaiting its return. She falls asleep until Jonathan wakes her up early the next morning to go and confirm it's Will's body. There, Hopper learns that Gary didn't do the autopsy, which he usually does, that someone from state did. Joyce and Jonathan see the body, but Joyce leaves angrily, not believing it is really Will. After a small argument about her lying to him, 11 proves to Mike that Will is alive as she makes contact with him through the walkie-talkie with her powers, hearing him singing his comfort song. Mike asks to stay home for the day, and after getting the boys to come over, and after a slight argument, they know they need a stronger signal to reach Will again as it keeps cutting out every now and then. So they give 11 a full-on makeover, which Mike compliments, and go to the school to make contact through the AV Club's super radio. They get confronted by Mr. Clark and they lie to him about 11 and why they want to use the radio, but they're successfully given the keys by Mr. Clark. But out of respect, they go and attend the assembly for Will. Nancy tells the police about everything, like the party, and tells them that the figure she saw must have taken Barb. They basically create a story that might explain where she's gone, that maybe out of jealousy of her and Steve she ran away. After Nancy and Karen go home and have a small argument, in her room, Nancy constructs a picture she took from Jonathan of Barb, and after piecing it together, she realizes the figure slightly. She goes to Jonathan, who's currently looking at coffins for the funeral, and she asks about the image and what it could be. She makes Jonathan remember and then realize that the faceless figure she's talking about is what his mum has been talking about the whole time. They go to the school's darkroom to help make the image clearer and find out that it truly is the faceless monster. Shepard, a worker at Hawkins' lab, enters the Upside Down through the gate to see what's really going on there on the other side, while being attached to a security line. But while inside, he talks about how everything is still there but all rotten and different. They attempt to reel him back in, but he's taken by the Demogorgon as his security line comes back with blood all over it. After the assembly ends, Mike confronts the bullies about disrespectfully laughing during it. They bully Mike about it all, which causes him to get sent over the edge and go and push Troy over. Troy gets up to fight Mike but is stopped midway. 11 makes Troy pee himself to help Mike out. After running away, they go inside the AV Club. 11 uses her powers to find wherever Will is. At the buyers, Joyce hears someone banging on the wall and hears Will screaming for her. Joyce breaks down the wallpaper and sees him through an opening into the Upside Down. He keeps screaming, describing where he is as home, but dark and cold. Eventually, the opening begins to close, and luckily the boys heard all of Will's side of the conversation, until the machine sparks a fuse. And back at the buyers, Joyce breaks down the wall to see if anything's there, only for there to be nothing. Hopper talks with Gary and discovers that a lot of troopers followed the autopsy and were with the body, claiming jurisdiction, kicking him out. So he goes to talk to the state trooper, David O'Bannon, who found Will's body. Hopper figures out that he's been lying, and after David leaves because Hopper's getting too close, Hopper finishes his drink and goes to beat David out back. Hopper learns that the people who told David to find the body there also told David to make sure no one else gets too close to the body. So Hopper goes to observe the body itself. He tells the lady at front that he forgot his hat, and Hopper punches the guard out cop that was standing in front of Will's body's room. After getting the keys, he enters and finds the body, and after touching it, he realizes the body feels weird. He grabs a knife out of his pocket and after a few moments of hesitation, cuts it slightly open, revealing that it's a fake body, stuffed with cotton like a plush. This is not Will's real body. He immediately goes and breaks into the lab and enters the restricted area he saw earlier. After being confronted, overpowering the two guards and stealing their access card, he keeps going forward, and sees 11's old room as well as the gate itself. He stares in awe as well as fear, only to be caught and put to sleep by the scientists. Will's funeral is held and everyone attends, including Will's father, Lonnie, who returns to Hawkins, as well as many other people who cared for Will. After the funeral, Jonathan and Nancy meet and prepare to find the Demogorgon and possibly kill it if they do. The boys try and talk to Mr. Clark about dimensions and how they could possibly travel there, using the Veil of Shadows as an analogy, as last night they remember the Upside Down and compared it to the Veil of Shadows, and how maybe Will was where 11 was, but just on the other side. He gives them an example of a flea and an acrobat, saying that in order to travel there, it would require require a massive amount of energy that would need to tear a hole through time and space. And if there was already a gate, it would disrupt the magnetic field. Hopper wakes up in the morning remembering all that happened last night. He knows he must have been drugged and they somehow knew where he lives. And he finds a bug in his place, as in the lab Dr. Brenner learns that 11 was in the AV club, helping the boys locate Will, as Dr. Brenner knows they can't hear Will's voice any other way. It was definitely 11. He sends the same actor from before over to the school to inspect and repair the device Elle broke, confirming their suspicion. Back at the buyers, Joyce and Lonnie argue, as it turns out Lonnie was only here for the money he could possibly get through a business, and so she rightfully kicks him out. Hopper learns that Barb's car was found by the same people from State, once again doing their job for them, and also that other kids went missing near Mirkwood. He goes to team up with Joyce, and after finding no chips in her house, he admits to her that she was right about Will from the beginning, the whole time. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas try and locate the gate with their compasses thanks to Dustin's idea. The compasses are pointing in the wrong direction, but the only thing capable of breaking a compass is a large power disrupting the magnetic field, much like the field Mr. Clark was talking about the night before, so they begin their hunt. But to keep them safe, 11 distorts all their compasses to lead them in the wrong direction. Lucas realizes this and a fight breaks out between them, and 11 knocks Lucas out unconscious before escaping. After Nancy practices hitting with the bat and Jonathan with the shooting, they both realize that they aren't doing too good. They meet up and swap weapons to try, and Nancy takes a good shot. Nancy and Jonathan go searching for the Demogorgon. They find a bleeding deer suffering and plan to end its suffering, until it gets dragged away into the bushes. Eventually Nancy finds the gate and enters the Upside Down, seeing the monster and running. Jonathan yells to Nancy through the gate he found, and Nancy follows his voice and returns through the Upside Down as the gate shuts. After this, Jonathan sleeps over at Nancy's place, which Steve sees when looking in her window. The next morning, the two talk about what happened and the clues they have so far, and realize that the monster seems to be lured by blood. Nancy and Jonathan purchase weapons to kill the Demogorgon, and on their way back they see a sign saying Nancy is a slut. A fight breaks out between Jonathan and Steve because of this, Jonathan throwing the first punch, resulting in Jonathan getting arrested by the police because quite frankly he won, but also because he was the only one they could catch. Back at the buyers, Joyce and Hopper read the documents over and talk about it, and realize that maybe Terry Ives was telling the truth, and maybe Hopper had been following clues towards her stolen daughter instead of Will. So they track down Terry Ives and travel to her house. Terry's sister Becky tells them about Terry's involvement in Project MK Ultra, the isolation tanks, and her belief that she really did have a daughter, no matter what the doctors say. With not much information to take, they leave their house and are alerted to Jonathan being arrested. Agent Connie visits Mr. Clark's house and finds out about Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. 11 is going around into the wilderness and then into the city, stealing Eggos from shops and more while Mike and Dustin are looking for her, but this time not with Lucas. He's still annoyed at 11 and doesn't want to continue anything with the boys if they have to be with Elle again, and would rather go straight to the gate. So Lucas goes out on his own to locate the gate, and follows the false magnetic north indication to the lab, where he figures out that the Hawkins power and light vans that were outside of his house were fake, disguised by the lab. In the woods looking for 11, Mike and Dustin are spotted by Troy and James, and they run away. They're caught, and Mike yells for them to let Dustin go and not to cut him, but in order for them to do that, they order him to jump off the cliff. Mike decides to risk his own life for Dustin and jumps down into the quarry, but as he jumps, he's caught by seemingly nothing, and is levitated to safety by 11. She pushes James to the ground and breaks Troy's arm. After the bullies flee and Dustin remarks that she'll kill them if they try and hurt them again, Elle falls to the ground drained and apologizes to Mike, saying that she's the monster because she opened the gate. Mike comforts and calms her down, saying that she's not the monster as she saved him from dying. Mike, 11, and Dustin hug. Mike, Dustin, and 11 head home, but the actor from before sees them all and contacts other agents to come to Mike's house, and all the agents begin to gear up. Lucas saw the same vans that are now leaving the lab at Mike's house, so Lucas screams at them through the walkie-talkie that they know about 11 and are coming after them. They see the actor and then more vans incoming. After grabbing their bikes and 11 seeing Papa, they flee. They go to and reunite with Lucas, and as they chase down the road and a car approaches them, 11 flips over the car with their mind, helping stop the other cars from advancing. They ride far enough away and stop, leading to Lucas apologizing to 11 and Mike and Lucas to reconcile. The agents then head into Mike's home to find anything of 11's, and to tell Mike's parents that Mike is in danger and to trust him, and for them to tell him where they might have gone. At the junkyard, the boys and 11 see helicopters are out looking for them. Hopper and Joyce arrive at the station, and after notifying them about the stuff they found in their car, Hopper asks to speak to them alone, and they all look through their proof of the Demogorgon. Hopper becomes aware of the incident with Troy, as Troy's mother went to the station and reported the girl, which Hopper immediately recognizes by Troy describing her head being shaved and that she has supernatural abilities, and that she hangs out with the boys. Hopper, Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy leave the station, and on their way home they see the huge amount of agents at the Wheeler house, and they plan to find the boys first. They go to the buyer's house and use the walkie-talkie to communicate with the boys in 11, getting their location off of them. Vehicles approach the others and they think that maybe Nancy and Hopper betrayed them. At least they thought, until Hopper beats up the agents who arrived first and save the boys in 11. They all meet and talk about all the information they know so far, including the fact that Hopper knows where the gate is, and they all plan to communicate with Will and Barb, but 11 can't reach them with the walkie-talkies and they can no longer use the AV Club machine. But Hopper and Joyce remember the sensory deprivation tanks, so they call Mr. Clark, whose date they're rudely interrupting, and they ask how to build the tanks, and Dustin manages to convince him to tell him how. They need salt. Lots of it. So Mike, Dustin, Lucas, 11, Joyce, Hopper, Nancy, and Jonathan break into Hawkins High, and they all help in different ways to make the sensory deprivation tank for 11 to use, with Joyce giving her some advice and thanking her for all the help. She readies herself and enters the void. She finds Barbara dead and screams that she's dead to tell the others. Joyce calms her down, telling her that she's safe and okay. 11 calms down and channels her powers to find Will, and she sees Will, weakened in the Upside Down's castle buyers. And after telling him that they're coming for him and to hold on a little longer, he disappears in the void, and 11 wakes up as the monster approaches and finds Will in the Upside Down. Joyce and Hopper go to find a way to enter the gate through the lab, as Jonathan and Nancy plan to lure the monster to Joyce's home and kill it there, breaking into the station and stealing back their equipment in order to kill the Demogorgon and distract it away from Joyce and Hopper when they enter the Upside Down. But those two are caught breaking into the lab, and after interrogating Joyce and then Hopper, Hopper ends up promising to reveal 11's location, and that he'll never reveal to the public anything about the agents or the operations going on in their lab, but only as long as the agents leave the three boys alone and only deal with 11, but also that they're both allowed to go into the Upside Down and find Will themselves. Nancy and Jonathan set traps for the monster in the buyer's home and reload all their weapons. In order to lure the Demogorgon, they cut their palms. Unexpectedly, Steve arrives and thinks that Jonathan hurt Nancy because her hand is bleeding. But when he enters and starts wondering what all the equipment is for, Nancy aims a gun at him and tells him to leave now, until the lights begin flickering. They look around for the Demogorgon as it breaks through the ceiling. Nancy starts shooting it, but they all run to lure it into their trap, but it seems to disappear as the lights return to normal and the noises stop. Steve asks questions about what the fuck he just saw, but is told to leave one more time. This time he dashes away quickly with fear, but when he faces the house again and sees the lights flickering, he bravely re-enters the house, and before Nancy gets eaten by the Demogorgon after she saved Jonathan from it, he hits the monster with a bat and knocks it away. They get it into the trap and light it on fire, but as they check the trap again, it's disappeared. They follow the lights to the door, where Jonathan realizes it's Joyce in the Upside Down. Outside, Nancy asks where it's going, but Jonathan tells them it's not the monster. Dustin and Lucas go look for food in the gym while 11 rests, and they find chocolate pudding. Mike and 11 talk, and he invites her to the snowball, and they kiss, revealing that they like each other romantically. The agents come to the school to capture 11 after Hopper told them about her location. Mike thought it was Nancy coming back, so he sees them coming, and warns everyone else about the agents. The agents find the pool and know that they're all here, so they search everywhere until they find all four of them in the hallway. They corner them, but 11 stares coldly into her eyes and kills them all at once, much like one did to those kids many years ago. Blood pouring out of their eyes. With a drained 11, the agents eventually grab the boys, and Papa grabs 11, but she tries to get out of Papa's hands and back to Mike and her friends. But the Demogorgon arrives, being lured by all the blood. It jumps through a gate, killing all the remaining agents, as well as seemingly killing Dr. Brenner. The boys pick up 11 and run into a classroom. They listen as the gunshots stop, wondering if it's dead. But the Demogorgon knocks the door wide open and heads towards the boys and 11. Lucas tries his best to knock the Demogorgon away and hurt it with his wrist rocket, but before it can harm the boys, 11 pushes it to the wall as strong as she could, like she did with 1 so long ago. 11's nose bleeds as she turns around and bids farewell to Mike. She then turns back to the Demogorgon and screams, using all the power she possibly can. She disintegrates the monster, but in the process disappears herself. The boys scream for her, but soon give up, knowing that she's gone for good. Joyce and Hopper enter the Upside Down in the protective suits and find Castle Byers destroyed. They follow a trail that leads from the Byers to the public library, where they search, finding Barb and eventually finding Will with a long tendril down his throat, which Hopper helps pull out his throat and through his mouth. They get Will on the ground and Hopper and Joyce perform CPR on him, trying over and over and over, and eventually he begins to breathe again. Hopper puts one of the oxygen masks on him and they help bring him back into the real world, where he's brought to Hawkins General Hospital. Emergencies arrive at the school and everyone reunites with their parents. Will wakes up later in the night in the real world to see Joyce and Jonathan. He asks where he is and Jonathan tells him that he's home, safe, and then he made a new mixtape for him. Jonathan goes to get the sleeping boys and they all wake up and rush into his room and hug Will. They begin instantly telling him stories about what he's missed, but he coughs and they realize that he's still obviously hurt, and Will says the Demogorgon got him. But they say not to worry, it's dead thanks to 11, and they continue to share stories all at once anyways, talking about the events that passed and the journey they embarked on. Outside the hospital, however, Hopper is picked up by a government car. After defeating the Demogorgon, 11 awakes in the Upside Down at the same place she disappeared. She walks through the school and finds the Demogorgon's temporary portal he used to get to the school. She walks through it and tests it. She uses her powers to make the gate bigger for her to fit through, and enters through it, coming back into the real world. She walks all the way to Mike's house and spots that the agents are outside still looking for her, and the agents give the Wheelers the stay quiet treatment as they try and get any information out of Mike. 11 sees him and they briefly share a glance through the window as 11 runs away and hides out in the local woods. 11 wanders the woods, killing a squirrel and trying to cook it for food. While cooking the squirrel, she encounters a random hunter. She knocks him unconscious using her powers and steals his coat and hat for warmth, and keeps running across the forest. 1 month after Will returned, it's Christmas Eve, and Mike, Will, Dustin, and Lucas play Dungeons and Dragons in Mike's basement again, and Will fireballs the Festival Hydra and wins the game. Jonathan comes down to pick Will up, and after he leaves and Dustin and Lucas begin fighting, Mike turns to the pillow fort he's keeping intact from memory of 11. He truly misses her. While leaving, Nancy stops Jonathan and gives him a gift and a kiss. Nancy and Steve gave Jonathan a new camera for Christmas. Hopper leaves the office early, taking a bunch of Eggos with him. He goes to a box in the forest and places the Eggo waffles in it. The buyers have dinner and Will excuses himself to go wash his hands. But within the bathroom, Will coughs up a type of slug creature and momentarily phases into the Upside Down, returning for a moment before phasing back. It seems there might be some lasting effects from his time cross-dimension. 11 discovers the box of food that Hopper has left for her and takes it. Hopper leaves food for 11 again, and this time she reveals himself to him. He's shocked but happy to find her there. He takes her to his grandfather's cabin and she begins living with him, and they refurbish it to become her new house. They set up things like Morse code and they set up traps in the woods so they know if anyone gets close. After cleaning, he creates some rules, the don't be stupid rules. Rule 1, keep the curtains drawn. Rule 2, only open the door if she hears a secret knock. And 3, never go out alone, especially not in the daylight. Throughout the span of the year, Dr. Owens becomes the new director of operations at Hawkins' lab. Will begins to have appointments at the lab so they can monitor for any lasting effects, but across the lab, they begin regular burning of the gate's original entrance, in an attempt to stall any of the Upside Down spread. Outside of the shady business at the lab, Mr. and Mrs. Holland hired Murray Bunman to investigate Bob's disappearance as Joyce begins dating Bob Newby, and William, nicknamed Billy, and Maxine, nicknamed Max, Hargrove move to Hawkins. On the 28th of June in Russia, the Russians are trying to open the gate to the Upside Down with their own research program similar to Hawkins' lab. They use 2 keys, turning them at the same time to begin the process. The machine is powered and charges up before shooting the wall, slowly opening a gate, slugs coming out. The machine is working. However, their efforts turn futile as the machine malfunctions, causing the gate to begin closing slowly and for the machine to blow up, killing all of the scientists below. They observe the damage and see the gate shut completely. The general orders henchman Grigory to kill the main scientist who worked on the machine. The other scientist, Alexei, is given 1 year to successfully build the machine for a gate to be opened in Russia. Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will gather any amount of money they can get, and all of them go to Palace Arcade trying to beat Dragon's Lair when they all discover Dustin no longer has the high score on Dig Dug. While the boys argue with Keith trying to figure out who Mad Max is, Will sees the Upside Down spores, and when he goes to ask his friends about it, he has yet another vision of the Upside Down where he hears a beast call from the bloody clouds. He snaps out of it when Mike calls his name and they head back inside. The next day, Murray goes to the station and tries to tell Hopper about a girl with a shaved head who he claims has abilities and is possibly a Russian spy. Hopper has to go and investigates the mysterious degradation and rot on Merrill Wright's pumpkin patch. And Merrill tells Hopper that he thinks it was his neighbor Eugene who did it, although having no evidence. New siblings Max and Billy arrive at Hawkins Middle and High. Max is introduced to the class and the boys realize that Maxine's nickname Max may be connected to Mad Max. The boys talk it through and try to figure out if it's her or not, and they're fairly certain it is. She drops a note in the bin and they rush over to see what it says. Dustin searches the bin and they read, "Stop spying on me, creeps." Unfortunately, Joyce arrives arrives at school and they have to go and do another checkup appointment at Hawkins' lab. Will talks to Dr. Owens about his vision at the arcade, that he saw this storm in the Upside Down and that he felt frozen in fear and felt as if the evil was looking at him, not wanting to kill him, but everyone else. Dr. Owens tells Joyce and Hopper that it's going to get better before it gets worse, and that it's some mix of PTSD and an anniversary effect due to it being almost a year since he was stolen. He makes sure that they know that Dr. Brenner and all of those bad people are gone now, and after they leave, Dr. Owens goes back to watch the scientist apply the heavy flames to the gate's entrance yet again. Dustin and Lucas stay outside the arcade to see if it's really her, and it seems as though the two are gaining a bit of a crush on Max. Both of them see her and Billy arrive and they argue, and after watching Max play Dig Dug, they confirm she's Mad Max. The Wheelers are having a yard sale and Mike has to pack 2 boxes himself, so he heads into the basement and begins packing. While down, Mike uses his walkie-talkie and attempts to contact Elle for the 352nd day in a row. After Mike finishes, Dustin and Lucas contact Mike and tell him about Max. After Mike deactivates his walkie-talkie, Lucas and Dustin split off and go home, and Dustin hears random rattling from inside his bin. Nancy and Steve have KFC at the Hollands, and they hear that they've hired Murray to help find Barb. Nancy excuses herself and begins to break down in the bathroom, because she knows that no matter how hard they try and how much money they pay, they'll never find Barb. Will and Jonathan have a talk about Zombie Boy and how everyone treats Will, but Jonathan tells Will that he's right and he is a freak, but it's okay to be a freak rather than being normal and lame. Within Hawkins' lab though, everything seems to be going off the rails. But back at the Byers, Will wakes up and goes to the bathroom, but while washing his hands he hears lightning outside. He goes to his door, seeing the red flashes through the window as the door opens on its own. Will gets goosebumps on his neck as he sees the Upside Down once again. He looks at the evil he felt at the arcade and sees a spider-like creature in the clouds staring right at him. Halloween rolls around and Hopper promises 11 he'll be home by 5:15 so they can watch scary movies together. He sees Joyce and they talk about what Will drew last night, a picture of the spider-like creature he saw, which they realize is a perfect match for outside, but Hopper tells her that they just need to wait it all out and he will get better. He then goes to the station and sees more pumpkins rotting, and Eugene thinks Meryl killed his props and everyone else's crops around town. Hopper goes to Eugene's and after seeing some form of goo near the dead crops, he starts thinking of the Upside Down, so they begin marking how far it goes into the woods from the farm. Whilst within the lab, a scientist ventures into the Upside Down and heads towards a satellite they have set up within it, which was causing the chaos last night since its battery got fried. He turns the battery back on and the controls return to normal. Mike, Dustin, Lucas and Will dress up as Ghostbusters and go to school. Dustin turns in fear as they all realize that no one else is even wearing costumes to school. Dustin and Lucas spot Max skating down the hallway. Later that day after class, they go and talk to Max and begin to try and impress her, and ask her about going trick-or-treating with them. She doesn't necessarily say no, but she does walk away after the invite. On their way home, Billy yells at Max as they're stuck in Hawkins and she blames it on him. He drives quicker along the road and as they keep going, Max sees the boys riding home and tells Billy to slow down. He laughs about hitting them and getting a strike and Max turns the vehicle for him, and the boys get back up, lucky they didn't get hit by the car. Mike, Dustin, Lucas and Will go trick-or-treating, Jonathan letting Will go on his own instead of tagging along. Jonathan heads to Tina's Halloween party, which Billy is absolutely showing off at, and when he sees Steve, Nancy leaves and goes to get drunk, telling Steve that they're meant to pretend to be normal teenagers again, so this is how she'll do it. The boys keep getting Three Musketeers and walk along the street talking about finding better houses until they're jump-scared by Max, and she joins them for trick-or-treating. Mike is annoyed about Max joining them for Halloween. He splits from Will when he slows down to think about the situation, but while briefly alone, Will is scared by multiple people and falls over with his camera. He looks up only to see the Upside Down spores. He's back. He hears monsters lurking around and sees a giant shadow rise in the distance, staring at him and then moving closer. He runs down the stairs as the shadow follows him down, until he's grabbed by Mike and snaps out of his vision. Mike tells the others that he'll just take Will home and he's bored anyways, but the others can keep going. Will talks to Mike about his vision, about the new shadow monster that was coming for him, and they briefly talk about 11, and both agree that if they're both crazy, they'll go crazy together. At Tina's, Steve tries to stop Nancy from drinking more and accidentally gets it all over her. They go to the bathroom to clean it up and Nancy tells Steve that everything is bullshit, including her love for him. Jonathan sees Steve leave the bathroom and then the party, and goes to pick up Nancy and takes her home responsibly while she's drunk so she can go and rest. Hopper loses track of time and rushes home to the cabin after bargaining with the child for the Halloween candy. He tries to guilt trip 11 into coming to eat with him as she shuts herself in her bedroom watching TV, until eventually turning it into static to enter the void in order to visit Mike telepathically, who at the same time was trying to contact her through the walkie-talkie. He asks her to give him a sign if she's still there, and she does as he feels her presence through the void but doesn't see her, so he turns off his walkie-talkie and walks away. Dustin Dustin arrives home after a fun night trick-or-treating and hears the rustling in the bin again. This time the bin shakes violently. He goes to investigate and discovers the creature. He takes it inside and it shakes in his ghost trap. He tells his mum that he's just rigged it up to look like he caught an actual ghost. He goes into his room, takes Yodel the turtle out of his cage and puts the creature inside. He figures it might be hungry and that's why it was in the trash. So he gives it 3 musketeers and figures out that it won't come out if it's hot. He calls it D'Artagnan, or Dart for short, and Dustin studies creatures for a while before falling asleep, while Dart begins to shake and growl violently. The next morning Dustin goes straight to the library and tries to order books about reptiles and other creatures, but he can only borrow 5 at a time, so he redirects her attention and steals the books from her. 11 is still upset at Hopper and he baits her out with an Eggo extravaganza. He knows she visited Mike last night in the void, and Hopper offers to go and check on him. They argue a bit about when she'll be able to leave properly and see Mike, and she pushes the table and slams the door shut with her powers. Bob takes Will to school one morning and they talk about him walking around last night and about his nightmares. He tells Will the story of Mr. Baldo, a clown that would appear in his nightmares every night. Every night he would run away from the clown, but one night the nightmares stopped after he stood his ground and yelled at Mr. Baldo to go away. Lucas and Max start talking about what's going on with Will. In class, Dustin barges in and arrives late, telling the boys to go meet in the AV club at lunch and then Max, as his bag rattles. He brought Dart to school. Hopper and his officers put together their information on where they saw the rot stop, and Hopper figures out that all the ends make circles that lead back to the lab. Hopper goes and talks to Dr. Owens about it, that it's all spreading from the lab, and Hopper asks him to convince him that there's not a leak and they all got it covered, to go to every area on the map and do tests on it. Hopper tells Dr. Owens that he needs to keep his shit out of his town, and he needs to convince him that it's not spreading. While back at his cabin, 11 breaks all 3 of his rules. She ventures outside and sees a mum and a child, asking her where the school is. She uses her powers to distract the kid and then her mum as she walks away. At lunch, he opens the trap and they all meet Dart. They pass the creature around from Max to Lucas to Will and then to Mike. They talk about what it is. Dustin says he's researched all different species, but none quite match Dart, as if it's a brand new one. But while talking, they see that there's something moving within it and shine the light to it, and it gets scared and roars. After hearing this, Will remembers hearing its roar in one of his visions. The bell goes and they all talk about possibly showing Mr. Clark. Nancy and Jonathan have lunch and talk about last night at Tina's and then all the stuff that's happened. Nancy comes up with an idea to arrange over the phone to meet Bob's parents and tell them the truth about what happened to her and the monster. Nancy gives the location and time to meet up, but the lab overhears what she says. Joyce checks the footage from Will's attack last night, and after calling Bob, figures out how to connect it to her TV, and she begins to watch through it. She sees the bullies and then him falling over, and then calling for Mike, but also sees a figure in the recording static. She grabs paper and draws the figure, seeing that it's the same figure that he drew the other night. After learning AV Club was possibly cancelled, she heads straight for the school. Back at school, after the bell rings, Dustin is about to show Mr. Clark Dart, and clarifies that it's his discovery and not Mr. Clark's. But Mike rushes in and tells them that they need to go now. They go inside the AV Club, locking the door on Max so they can talk about it. Mike tells him that Will saw something like Dart last year, but also heard it in one of its episodes, and that maybe Will can somehow see into the Upside Down. The monster rattles in the cage, and Mike grabs the light to prepare to attack, just in case. Dustin opens the cage, and it grows legs right in front of them. It roars and Mike attacks, but Dustin stops him from hitting it directly. Outside, Mac picklocks the door, trying to get inside and see what they're talking about, and so Dart escapes and runs down the hall. After meeting with Dr. Owens at one of the sites, and showing him that they're gonna test it, Hopper learns that 11 left as the mum called the police. At this time though, 11's at the school and sees their bikes. She goes inside the buildings to find them, while all the group are still looking for Dart. Mike goes into the gym and runs into Max, and he and Max argue about her joining the group, and Mike accidentally spills about Elle. Max shows him tricks in the gym with her skateboard, and 11 sees him having fun, and decides to use her powers to knock Max off her board. Max tells Mike about how it felt like a magnet that pushed her off her board, and Mike knows straight away that it sounds like 11, so he goes and checks, but sees no one. Will goes inside the toilets and finds Dart. He contacts the others about where it is, but Dart squeals at him. He drops the walkie-talkie and runs outside, only to phase into the Upside Down. He looks around and sees the shadow turn the corner and start to follow him. He runs as fast as he can, trying to outrun the shadow monster until he exits the school building. Dustin finds Dart before the others and puts it under his hat. Mike, Max, and Lucas come inside the bathrooms and Dustin tells him that Dart's not there, but Mike realizes that Will isn't either. Will remembers Bob's words about Mr. Baldo, so he stands his ground as he watches the shadow rise from the school. He yells at it to go away over and over until the shadow attacks Will and goes inside of his body.
Easy peasy, right?
Easy peasy.
Just like that.
Joyce speeds to the school, checking the AV club, learning he's not there. She hears Dustin calling out and looking for Will, and she meets with them. Lucas runs inside the building, telling them all where he is, as Mike and Lucas found him on the field. As in the Upside Down, Will is getting taken over by the Shadow Monster, and after the Shadow is fully inside with him, he instantly snaps back to reality. As Joyce takes Will home, the boys can tell that it's getting worse, as it's now 2 episodes in 2 days. Max, however, doesn't fully know what's going on. At the bars, Joyce talks to Will, telling him to tell her the truth, and confronting him about the Shadow Monster. He tells her that it's like a feeling, that he tried to make it go away and that it got him, that he felt it everywhere, and that he just wants all of it to be over and return back to his old life before he even knew that the Upside Down existed. 11 returns back to the cabin with Hopper's figure staring coldly into the dark. He asks her questions about where she went and who might have seen her. She has a heated argument with Hopper about wanting to leave. He grounds her, no Egos, no TV for a week, but before he can continue, she uses her powers to stop him from moving the TV. So he bumps it up to 2 weeks, and she doesn't bug, so he bumps it up to a month. Then to never again. She tries to fix the TV and Hopper calls her a brat, chucking the dictionary to her, but 11 catches it with her mind and flings the dictionary at Hopper, then knocking him over with a couch, slamming things around the house and then locking the door. 11 screams and all the windows within the cabin smash. The next morning he goes to work, hoping that she cleans up before he comes back home, and she uses her powers to clean up the house until she finds a trap door while cleaning and opens it. She finds a box containing info on Hawkins' lab. She grabs it and finds Terry Ives' file, and then decides to contact her via the void. Within the void, she sees Terry repeating words in her chair, until she suddenly stops and turns. Terry feels 11's presence, and while shocked calls out the name Jane, and 11 leaves the void, realizing her mum is still alive. Will wakes up and Joyce realizes that he's actually naturally colder, and when Joyce goes to give him a warm bath, he goes to it and drains all the water, saying that he prefers it cold. Hopper eventually arrives and Will attempts to explain the Shadow Monster to them, saying he just knows things now. Old memories in the back of his head, but not his memories, and not even memories at all, as if it's happening right now. Will mentions that he feels like something's growing, spreading, killing. Joyce tells Will instead of talking with words, maybe draw it out. While this is happening, Mike tries to contact the buyers, but they don't pick up. So Mike, Dustin and Lucas, and not Max, go to the AV club and they discuss what happened on Halloween night and what might have happened on the field. Mike plans to go to his house on the way home and tells Dustin and Lucas they must find Dart. So Mike goes to the house to see Will and reveals to Joyce that he knows about the Shadow Monster. Nancy and Jonathan are waiting at the place they told Barb's parents to meet. They notice people staring at them and following them, and they go to their car to drive away, only to notice their car isn't starting. They are surrounded and then forcibly taken to Hawkins' lab, as the lab were listening to their conversation about revealing the truth to Barb's parents. When they get there, Dr. Owens gets them to follow him, and eventually he leads them to the gate, telling them that they can't reverse this mistake and that they're trying to stop it from spreading. But the main reason they don't want anyone revealing anything is that the Soviets, for example, might not think it's a mistake at all, and might try and replicate it, creating a new gate. And that's the possible consequences of revealing what happened to Barb. But unbeknownst to Owens, they recorded his speech. After school, Max is annoyed at Lucas and the group for basically ditching her with no reason, at least to her knowledge. Billy sees them argue, and in the car tells her not to hang around him anymore and to stay away from Lucas. Dustin, however, heads straight home and discovers that Dart broke out of the turtle cage, so he searches his room to find a much larger Dart feeding on the lifeless body of Muse, as it eventually turns to him and screams. Joyce and Hopper realize that although it's just lines and dashes, they actually connect with each other, and they join together over a long time in order to form the larger image. They see it all laid out and realize it looks like roots with a dirt color. They think about what Will said about it, how it's spreading and killing, and Hopper realizes what it might be, that he's drawing vines. Hopper goes to one of the pumpkin patches and digs down until he hits some sort of goo. He discovers below is hollow and digs a large enough hole to hop down, only to find himself in a seemingly endless underground tunnel with the upside down spores floating all around. Hopper explores the cave and upon spotting something on the roof, is sprayed directly with spore-like particles not once but twice, and slowly loses consciousness as the hole he entered rebuilds itself. Will tries to explain his connection to the Shadow Monster to Mike. Mike tells Will that he's a spy now, spying on the Shadow Monster. But Will tells Mike what if the Shadow Monster is spying on them? But Mike assures him that they won't let it and Will be safe from it no matter what. Jonathan and Nancy check into a motel before making their next move with their plan. But while inside, they talk about last year and how they still have their scars, and they share a moment, talking about why nothing happened between them, and they head to sleep. Will wakes up suddenly and Mike notices. They go and tell Joyce that he saw Hopper and he's in trouble and might die in the tunnels. And Will Will draws and then points out where he saw Hopper, marking an X on the exact spot, so Mike and Joyce look around until they find the place that fits. Underground, Hopper regains his consciousness, spitting out goo, and he decides to try and escape straight away, and after he realizes his hole is now covered, he covers his mouth up and keeps investigating, and he finds a graveyard. He lights a match and realizes that the vines don't like fire, so he lights a larger fire on a stick and begins trying to escape. While resting for a moment due to exhaustion, vines tangle around him and trap him. He falls over and gets fully trapped underground. Dustin's mum keeps looking for Muse and he smartly sends his mum away. As soon as she leaves though, Dustin instantly starts preparing his trap for Dart. He opens the door, letting Dart loose, and he runs to the shed and watches as Dart follows his trap. When Dart approaches the door, he runs out and hits Dart right into the cellar and locks him in there. He attempts to get help from anyone else, but he can't reach anyone. He goes to the Wheelers to find Mike, but his parents are no help. Eventually though, he finds Steve ready to apologize to Nancy about earlier, and he grabs Steve's attention, gets in his car, and gets his help to kill Dart. Eleven gets a ride to Terry Ives' home where she meets Becky, who first sends her away until Eleven unlocks and opens the door on her own, saying she wants to see her mum. Becky lets her in and Eleven discovers her mother, who's stuck in a state she doesn't understand. They both talk and Becky shows Eleven the room that was meant to be for her. She notices that the lights are flickering and makes a path straight to Terry. Eleven realizes she wants to talk and is able to connect with her through the void, and is able to see the memories playing inside Terry's mind of everything that happened to her baby until she was forced into this state. Eleven tells Becky what she saw in Terry's mind, and that she thinks Terry wants her to find the girl, Carly, who was with Eleven as a child. Becky helps her find a picture of Carly, and at night Eleven uses the void to locate her. Eleven goes to tell Becky she found her, but Becky called the police, asking for Hopper and Joyce, for the police to try and locate the two and bring them to Terry's. But Eleven overhears this and steals money from Becky, leaving to find Carly. Jonathan and Nancy drive to meet with Murray Bowman, and they tell him the truth about Barb's disappearance. After talking, Murray decides the best way to take down Hawkins' lab is to make a watered down version of the story, as it will be way more believable to the public than the full-on truth about interdimensional monsters. Nancy, Jonathan, and Murray send out the evidence against the lab to national newspapers. After they do so, he sets up a bed for Nancy and Jonathan can sleep on the pullout, although he tells them to just cut the bullshit and sleep together. Eventually, Nancy and Jonathan give in to their feelings and sleep together. Lucas is able to lure Max into the back and he decides to tell Max the truth about what happened last year, telling her to accept the risk. But after telling her, she doesn't immediately believe him and thinks Lucas is just making up a story, and she leaves. And they argue outside of the room, and when she starts talking about the top secret information outside, he shuts Max up and tells her that she's gonna get them both killed if she keeps talking, and Max asks him to prove it, but Billy arrives and she has to leave, Billy confronting her about Lucas. The lab looks at the soil samples from the pumpkin patches and watches them react weirdly to heat, and all the samples seem to do the same thing with a hive mind. Bob arrives at the buyers and Joyce asks him to help find the X Will drew, and Bob realizes the drawings are a map of Hawkins itself and he helps locate the X. They leave to find Hopper immediately, and when they don't know where to go, Will tells them where he is and leads them down the right path. When they see Hopper's vehicle, the vines in the ground, and they decide to dig down. When they get down, they search for Hopper and are able to cut him free. Before a moment's rest, workers from the lab arrive in the tunnels and they burn it fully, which causes Will extreme pain as he collapses to the ground and begins to have a seizure. Will is rushed to Hawkins' lab. They don't understand what's going on as he said he's burning, but there's no burn marks on him. They keep asking questions until he's eventually put to sleep. Dustin and Steve travel to Dustin's. Upon arriving, Steve grabs his bat. Steve eventually goes down the cellar and discovers that Dart has shed its skin again, and is escaped by making a tunnel that unknowingly to them leads to the larger tunnels, which after burning the caves, the scientists discover that Will's connected to them burning. They go to the buyer's house and take photos of everything, the vines he drew and the shadow monster, etc. Back at the lab, Joyce talks to all the head scientists and gets mad at them, wondering what's wrong with her boy. Lucas eventually is told by Erica that Dustin yelled about a code red, so he uses the walkie-talkie and talks to Dustin about it, which they tell Lucas to meet Dustin with Steve on the tracks. Lucas goes to Max's house and tells her that he has proof, and to avoid Billy, Lucas goes around the house and Max gets on his bike as they ride to Dustin and Steve. Dr. Owens shows Hopper the gate, but not like it was before, the now grown gate, larger than ever. They go all the way down and figure out that the tunnels are connected to the gate. Hopper asks why they haven't burned it yet, and Dr. Owen tells them that there's a complication. While in Will's room, Joyce tells Bob about what really happened to Will, and the fact that he'll probably have to sign a lot of confidentiality documents. Will wakes back up, but when he asks who Bob is, they realize he's losing his memory. They test Will and it's proven he knows his own name, doesn't know Dr. Owens, but he knows Mike, but doesn't know Hopper. They ask him about last night and what he remembers, and he tells them that the soldiers hurt Will and upset the shadow monster. They bring in a piece of the vines they tested on and begin to do a burn test, burning it slowly, which causes Will a sting. They keep going and Will gets more hurt and hurt until it's too much. They know Will's connected to a hive mind of sorts. house. Dustin and Steve lay food on the tracks in order to possibly lure Dart to them to kill it, and while doing so they talk about relationships, and Steve gives him advice about it all and also about his hair and what products he uses. They walk all the way to the junkyard as Lucas and Max arrive. Dustin and Lucas argue about telling Max and about Dart until they reconcile, and all the kids help Steve fortify the junkyard and prepare it for a possible battle against the young Demogorgon. 11 arrives in Chicago and finds Carly's gang, who threaten 11 at first, but then Carly uses her powers to make spiders appear out of nowhere, and 11 and Carly reconnect. Jane and Carly reconnect for the first time since the Rainbow Room. They show off their tattoos and hug. They swap stories about what's happened to them, and Carly shows off her powers to 11, creating a butterfly in 11's mind, and the two bond. Carly gives her a bed and more to stay overnight. Carly and the gang talk about 11, how she can find people without moving, and they plan to go hunt the next day. 11 uses the void to hear a message from Hopper. As outside the lab, Hopper radios to the cabin. He tells her about where he is and that he's sorry about what's happened. But inside of the lab, the head scientists talk about what's going on with Will, and how something is spreading in his brain. No one has suggestions on what to do, and they talk about how they can't delay the burning. Dr. Owens doesn't like the idea as it will kill Will, and he goes to think. Joyce gets up to go talk to Dr. Owens. While she argues with the guards, the shadow monster inside of Will thinks about what to do, and Will tells Mike that he knows how to stop the shadow monster. Earlier in the day, Jonathan and Nancy woke up and ate breakfast at Murray's, who noticed their weird behavior. They leave Murray's to go to the buyers, which they see the drawings all over the wall and the shadow monster, as well as proof that the lab has been there taking photos. Back inside the lab, they lay out all the photos along the table, and Will tells them where to go as the shadow monster doesn't want Will to see a specific location. So all the scientists gear up and head to that very location Will told them about. Carly introduces 11 to the entire gang. They tell 11 about what they do, that they find and kill bad men, aka the people who hurt them in the lab. Carly goes to train 11, and much like one told her in their past, she says to use all of her anger to focus on her power and pull an extremely heavy train towards her. So she channels all of her anger and uses it to successfully get it all the way to her and Carly as she falls from all the energy she used, and the gang congratulate her from the side. Then 11 remembers and locates Ray Coral, and they all plan to murder Ray that night. 11 uses her powers to locate him in the void. They all gear up and give 11 a complete makeover to make her fit in with him more, and to properly join the gang. The whole gang with 11 hop in the van, which inside they test out and then give 11 her own special mask. They arrive at the gas station and Carly uses her powers to distract the worker, and they rob it for stocks. The worker comes back out and aims the gun at them, and 11 uses her powers to push him away against the wall. And as officers come, they all run away into the van and escape. That night, they arrive at Ray's house, getting out of their vehicle to go and kill him. 11 opens the door and turns the TV off to distract him as they enter. Dottie and Axel begin looting their house, while Carly reminds Ray of his crimes against them. 11 pushes him to the wall, and Ray tells him that he did what Dr. Bretta told him to do, and that he's still alive and that he can help them find him. 11 doesn't believe this and decides to psychically choke him, slowly but surely killing him. But after seeing a photo of Ray with his children, 11 changes her mind as the others find those very children calling the police. So she lets him live and prevents Carly from shooting him as well. They run quickly and head back to their hideout. Lucas and Max have a moment until they hear Dart scream. Lucas sees the beast and tells them where it is. So Steve grabs his bat and chucks Dustin a lighter. He goes outside to face the growling beast until Lucas spots another one in the distance. Not just one more, but multiple. Lucas yells at Steve and he sees all the different Demogorgon dogs. Dustin yells for him to abort the mission and Steve barely escapes as they shut the door. The Demogorgon dogs keep trying to get inside as Dustin keeps trying to get more help. But there's something above Max. The Demogorgon dog growls as Steve pushes Max aside to fight it, but it screeches and runs away. They all do. Back underground, the scientists are almost at the location when Hopper notices they've just been led to the graveyard. They notice that nothing's there as strange noises are heard and a fog appears. Will tells him he's sorry and that he told him to do it. They shouldn't have upset him. And Mike realizes they've all been lured for another reason. It's a trap for more kills, so the shadow monster can get revenge on the soldiers. The Demogorgon dogs kill them all, one by one, and they leave the graveyard. Hopper sees the elevator moving slightly and they all witness the Demogorgon dog climb up and reach the lab. At the hideout, Carly tells her how she escaped using her powers and how she was able to survive after. After 11 recalls that Ray said Papa is alive, Carly gives her visions of Papa, but 11 kicks Carly out of her head as she tells 11 about fighting back. But the gang is ambushed by police as they slowly enter their hideout. Up in 11's room, she tries to locate Mike and Hopper using the void and sees Hopper seeing the agents being killed by the dogs and Mike yelling about Will's trap. But she returns back as the police enter the building. Carly gives all the officers a vision, but the vision is that they're all just not there. They escape their hideout, but on their way out are confronted by more police. Carly uses her powers to make them envision a wall being raised all the way to the sky that blocks them from getting over. But after talking and as the illusion starts to break, 11 abandons the group after seeing Hopper and Mike in danger, and runs as fast as she can away to escape the police, and eventually takes the trip back to Hawkins to save her friends. Back at the lab, the Demogorgon dog tries to break the glass. Dr. Owen's assuring it can't, so more Demogorgon dogs are all called and they all try and break the glass. Dr. Owens alerts the lab as the Demogorgon dogs break through. Hopper and Dr. Owens climb up the stairs as other scientists use the elevator. The elevator opens above and they've killed all the scientists. After Will stutters to forget his own mother, she puts Will to sleep. Hopper and Dr. Owens enter and see them all. They head to the security/surveillance room and witness as Demogorgon dogs have fully invaded the lab. Eventually all the power turns off and the lab is sent into darkness. Max's parents arrive home and see Max isn't there, so they walk in and ask Billy, who's in a very good mood getting ready for a date, where she is. He says he doesn't know and gets briefly abused by his father. He realizes he's gonna have to skip his date and look for his sister. His sister and the boys walk around the tracks, and Lucas realizes Dustin hid Dart the whole time. As they all argue, Steve hears a squeal from the woods and goes to investigate, and they all see that the lab is completely shut off power, which it never, ever is. Back inside the lab, Dr. Owens is planning how to find an exit, and they all learn they need to restart the power. Hopper goes to do it, but Bob stops him, realizing no one else can go restart it and unlock the doors besides him, as he's the only one who can use computer code. Bob tells Hopper alone to not wait for him, as soon as he gets the doors open for Hopper to get them all out. Jonathan and Nancy arrive at the lab, realizing the power is out, and they hear something in the woods. It's the rest of the crew, Steve, Dustin, Lucas, and Max. They talk briefly until they hear monsters from within the lab and realize something terrible is happening inside. Which inside, Bob goes all the way down and turns the power back on. The gang outside see the lights turn on and try and open the entrance gate. Bob opens all the doors, including the front gate, but as the Demogorgon dog comes downstairs, Bob activates water to spray on the floor above to give him an escape. Dr. Owens stays as the others all go and escape the lab, but as Bob goes upstairs himself, Dr. Owens tells him to stop, as the Demogorgon dogs are coming down the hall. So Bob heads into the supply closet until it passes. As he's given the all clear and leaves, a broomstick falls and makes a noise, alerting the Demogorgon dog, causing him to run and sprint out of there. He opens the main doors and shuts them behind him. Joyce sees him and is glad he escaped, but as they share one final glance, one jumps through the door and kills Bob gruesomely. Hopper walks in and shoots it off, but as he does, a lot more enter, a lot more, and start to chase. So Hopper grabs Joyce and pulls her out as they rip Bob apart. The Demogorgon dogs try and break through the entrance doors as Jonathan pulls up, so they get in and all escape. The rest of the kids and Steve get into Hopper's van and they all drive straight to the buyers as the monsters all feast on Bob. Hopper tries to contact military backup, and with little to no hope, Hopper goes to comfort Joyce. They all talk about what's going on and discuss their options against the Demo Dogs, Dustin's name. Mike figures out that they're all connected and have a hive mind. They gather everyone else and talk about the Mind Flare, which is the best analogy to what's going on. That it's all leading to a war, the Mind Flare trying to invade their world and take over. But if they can kill the Mind Flare, they can kill its army, and Joyce agrees they have to do it. But they don't know how, until Mike realizes that the only one who knows how to kill this thing is Will, and Mike tells him that he can't spy if he doesn't know where he is. They all set up and camouflage the shed together, making it impossible for Will to know where he is. They grab Will and tie him to the chair, and just in case, Joyce prepares to put him to sleep again. When they're all ready, Hopper wakes Will. Will doesn't know where he is and screams for them to let him out. The Mind Flayer is talking through Will. Eventually Will calms, and Joyce talks to Will about his birthday and the happy memories from his past. Jonathan talks to Will about the day Lonnie left, that they built Castle Byers to replicate his drawings of it, that they stayed out even during the rain to finish building it, and they even got sick after. Mike talks to Will about their friendship, the first day they met, and how they were both each other's first friend. They're starting to get through to Will and ask him to talk to them instead of the Mind Flayer, but Will freezes back up and tells them to let him go. But Hopper realizes Will is tapping on his chair and recognizes Morse code. So they all re-enter the house and realize Will is telling him that he's still there, talking to them in a form of communication that the Mind Flayer wouldn't even realize is communication. Jonathan grabs Should I Stay or Should I Go and plays out as they share more stories with Will from his past, as Will keeps communicating. Eventually they make out the message, close gate, but as soon as they figure it out, the phone inside rings. Will closes his eyes and the Mind Flayer sends the Demo Dogs to his house. They put Will to sleep and walk outside the shed. They hear the Demo Dogs outside and inside. The entire crew gather and prepare themselves with any weapons they have and set up preparing for a battle against the beast. They all listen to the noises outside and follow it with their weapons until a Demo Dog bursts through the windows dead. Hopper checks it and confirms that it's dead as the door unlocks itself. They all face a gun towards the door as it opens wide, and Shoes walk inside the house. 11 return to everyone. Mike sees 11 for the first time in almost a year and can't believe his eyes. They hug and 11 tells Mike she heard every call, and Hopper confirms he was hiding 11 the entire time. He grabs Mike to talk alone, and they argue briefly until he gives up, crying in Hopper's arms. 11 hugs Dustin and Lucas and they talk briefly. Max tries to introduce herself, but due to earlier, 11 ignores her and goes straight to Joyce. She goes and talks to Will and then sees the message about closing the gate. 11 telling Joyce that she can close the gate which the Mind mind flayer is preparing to enter through, and the gate that the Demodogs are guarding. Billy during this time visited the Sinclairs, who told him to visit the Wheelers, Karen answering the door and talking to him about Max. They playfully flirt as Billy gets to Byers' location and prepares to head there. 11 confirms she can do it no matter how big it is and if there's Demodogs there or not, and Mike tells them that if the brain dies, all of the army dies, including Will though. They realize they need to make the host uninhabitable and get whatever it is in him out. They need to take him far away to a place he doesn't know, which they plan to take Will to Hopper's cabin. Steve tells Nancy to go with them, so she joins the Byers. Mike and 11 talk to each other, promising they won't lose each other again. The two cars leave as Mike, Dustin, Lucas, Max and Steve stay behind. 11 tells Hopper she went to go and see her mum, and they both talk about what they should have and shouldn't have done. Hopper tells 11 about Sarah and that she's gone, and that's why he tries to protect her as much as he can, and they reconcile as they head directly to the lab. Back at the house, Dustin and Steve put the Demodog in the fridge. They all think of a plan to get the Demodog's attention to make a clear entry to the gate for 11 and Hopper. They plan to set the hub, aka the graveyard, on fire, but Steve doesn't agree to this plan. It'll kill them all. But out of nowhere, Billy arrives. He sees Steve outside and Billy confronts him. Billy tells Steve that he can outright see Max and her friends in the house punching Steve and walking inside. He confronts Lucas and pushes him to the wall, telling him to stay away from Max, but Lucas kicks him in the balls. Billy says Lucas is gonna die, but Steve grabs him, telling him he will, and punches Billy, knocking him down. After a small conversation, Billy and Steve begin to fight and throw each other around the house. Steve eventually ends up on the floor, being beaten by Billy. Max grabs one of the syringes and before Billy can keep hitting, stabs him with it. He takes it out himself and falls to the ground. Max confronts him, telling him to leave her and her friends alone, while holding Steve's bat. He laughs it off and she swings right below him, until he agrees. Joyce, Jonathan, Nancy, and the sleeping Will arrive at the cabin and set up a bunch of heaters to aim at Will. They turn all of them on and start to burn Will. Hopper and 11 arrive at the lab, 11 being afraid to return at first. After all, this was the place she spent most of her childhood being experimented on. Hopper tells her not to do anything until they're below to save her strength, so they go and enter the lab. Steve wakes up slowly, seeing Mike and then Dustin and then seeing Lucas and then Max driving. He starts to freak out knowing what's happening and Max speeds up, roughly turning the corner as they approach the pumpkin patch. Will wakes up and starts to hurt. Joyce turns the heaters up higher to speed up the process. Will starts to hurt more and more while the pumpkin patch is invaded by the boys and Max. They grab gas, cover their mouth and eyes, and with a rope go down into the tunnels, with Steve taking charge. Hopper and 11 meanwhile are walking through the lab and discover Dr. Owens bleeding on the stairwell. He helps him and Dr. Owens finally sees 11, and the two meet for the first time. Hopper tells Dr. Owens that after all this is done, he should help 11 live a normal life as they continue into the lab. Underground in the sewers, Dustin gets sprayed by the spores and over-exaggerates as he's perfectly fine as his mouth is covered. They all find the hub and begin to fill it with gasoline while Will is screaming his head off. Jonathan and Joyce argue about turning it off until they see the mind flare taking full control of Will as he begins to break out, grabbing Joyce by her throat. Back in the lab, they're almost at the gate as they hear Demodogs in the room right next to it. But Steve and the gang prepare to light the hub up as Nancy uses a burning pole to stab Will, so he lets Joyce go as Hopper goes into the room to start shooting. But the gang burn the hub completely and they run to escape the tunnels as the Demodogs escape the lab and the mind flare escapes Will. Will wakes up alive and they hug him. Jonathan contacts Hopper, telling him to close the gate. The others are escaping the tunnels as Mike trips and his leg gets tangled up. 11 is now halfway down the elevator to the gate, facing the mind flare dead on. It's almost in their world, ready to take over. The others help Mike and they're all confronted by Dart. They know it's Dart due to the yellow spots on him, unlike all the other Demodogs. Dustin goes to Dart and feeds it as it lets them all pass. 11 continues closing the gate, thinking about Carly's advice as the others are trying to escape the tunnels. All the Demodogs are heading towards them, so they all climb out one by one. First Max, then Lucas, then Mike. But before Dustin goes, the Demodogs turn the corner and run right to them, ready to kill. Mike and Lucas look in confusion as the Demodogs run right past them. They realize 11 is closing the gate. The Demodogs are now attacking Hopper and 11 as he shoots as many of them as he can, as they keep on coming. The mind flare pushes through the gate, sending one of its arms into the real world, aiming at 11 to kill her. But 11 remembers everything that's happened to her and uses both of her hands and raises in the air as she screams, stopping the mind flare's advance. The mind flare growls at her as the gate shuts. The Demodogs fall down and all die instantly. Hopper holds 11 as they calm down on the elevator next to the now closed gate. 1 month later, Hawkins' lab shuts down completely as Murray sits outside waving them off. Barb's incident is now public, being exposed to a liquid from the lab. Residents of Hawkins no longer believe they live in a safe town. Hopper reunites with Dr. Owens and he gives Hopper an envelope, giving Hopper a fake birth certificate for Jane, now renamed Jane Hopper. Hopper asks if 11 can go out for one night, to go out to the snowball. Joyce and Will practice dancing as Jonathan records. Lucas practices asking Max to the dance as Max and Billy share a glance, Billy leaving her alone. Dustin uses the spray Steve told him to, and he drives Dustin to the snowball and gives him some final advice before setting him off. They shake hands as Dustin enters, seeing Mr. Clark as Steve sees Nancy and drives off. Nancy serving drinks and Jonathan taking photos. Dustin reunites with the others and they all talk about his hair. Time after time starts playing and Lucas invites Max to the dance. Will gets asked by a random girl to start dancing and Mike hits him, hinting to him to go and dance, so he accepts. Dustin knows Lucas is no longer an option and goes to ask Stacy, being rejected, and then goes to ask another girl until not even getting a chance to be rejected as she walks away. Nancy sees Dustin alone as he heads to the gymnasium seats and cries. Nancy walks over to him and asks him to dance. All the other girls look at him as Nancy begins to teach him how to dance. Outside, Joyce sits along her car thinking about Bob. Hopper offers and gives Joyce a cigarette and they talk about it, Hopper comforting Joyce. Inside, Mike waits and sees Eleven enter as they go and dance. Nancy and Dustin are having a good time, Will's having a good time, Lucas is having a good time with Max as she kisses him, which absolutely shocks him, and Mike and Eleven finally kiss after so long apart. They're all finally happy and moving on, but things aren't over for any of them yet, as the Mind Flayer lurks in the Upside Down, pissed off, angrier than ever. In between the snowball and summer break, the Soviet Union had finally perfected the key. After buying properties and land in East Hawkins, the USSR creates a secret Russian facility underneath the Starcourt Mall which keeps it hidden. Mayor of Hawkins Larry Klein is aware of the Russian infiltration. Stephen Newgale, Robin Buckley work at Scoops Ahoy, an ice cream shop, and Nancy and Jonathan work at the Hawkins Post, and Billy works at Hawkins Community Pool. June 28th, 1985 rolls around and Hopper goes full-on dad mode on Eleven and Mike. And after Mike leaves, he heads to Starcourt Mall to go and hang out with Will, Lucas, and Max. They rush and head into Scoops Ahoy in order to get Steve to let them through to the back so they can sneak into the movies for free. They sneak into a showing of Day of the Dead, and while watching, the power randomly goes out. Not just at the movies, but all around the mall, as a gate is being opened right underneath them. And in Brimborn Steelworks, the remaining piece of the Mind Flayer that was trapped in Will and then trapped in our world reawakens. When the power returns, Will feels something he hasn't in a long time. A dark feeling, an evil presence, something he so desperately tried to move on from. Dustin returns home from his trip at Camp Nowhere, and he wonders why his friends aren't picking up, thinking they've forgotten about him. While sitting on his bed, Dustin gets scared as toys begin to move on their own, all heading in one direction. He follows them to the hallway, but the toys aren't just moving on their own. The gang are all there. They all remembered. Eleven stops using her powers on the toys, and as Dustin confusingly looks at them all, the crew creep behind him and welcome him home. Dustin shows them all his machines and stuff they made at Camp Nowhere, including Cerebro, a device that can reach all the way from North Pole to South. But while talking about it, Dustin spills that he has a girlfriend named Susie who comes from Utah. So they all head out to set up Cerebro to introduce the crew to Susie. They travel up a large hill and Eleven and Mike leave to go home for a curfew, obviously lying. But as the rest continue forwards, Will feels that dark feeling again as he gets those major goosebumps. As at Brimborn, a large amount of mice all head down into the basement and begin blowing up and exploding out of nowhere. The gang eventually reach the top and begin assembling Cerebro. When they finish, Dustin tries to contact Susie, but she doesn't respond straight away. Maybe just busy eating dinner, so they all begin waiting with Dustin. While cleaning, Nancy picks up the phone as Miss Doris Driscoll calls the Hawkins Post about deceased rats, and Hopper's trying to take Joyce's advice and talk properly to Mike and Eleven. And it was all going well until Mike and Eleven start messing around, so he makes up an excuse that Mike's grandma is in danger and takes him to his car, as he tells Mike strict rules about continuing in their relationship as they drive back to his house. Back with Cerebro, Susie is still not responding, so Max and Dustin and then Will leave. But when they leave, Cerebro eventually activates as Dustin accidentally picks up on a Russian communication. Underneath Starcourt, the gate is continuing to remain open as long as Alexi's machine is working. Billy drives ready to meet up with Karen for some swimming lessons, but his car gets hit with something. He gets out and discovers some form of goo on his windshield. He hears rustling around the area and asks who's there, until being grabbed by something and pulled down into the basement of Brimborn, which below he got attacked by something that seemingly grabbed his face. Billy resurfaces and drives to the nearest phone box to call for help, but while calling, he phases into the Upside Down and sees an army walking towards him. An army whose leader is himself. The other Billy asks Billy to build the army he sees before him. Hopper tells Joyce about all that happened and organizes the day at Enzo's. When he has to leave due to rioters at Town Hall, Joyce goes and notices the magnets acting weird. At Starcourt, Dustin reunites with Steve and they instantly bond again. Dustin tells him about Susie and how the crew left him last night, but also tells him about the secret Russian communication he intercepted as well. He just needs help translating the communication communication. 11 goes to Max to talk to her about Mike and what's happening between them. So 11 and Max go to Starcourt to have fun while the boys go in order to figure out how Mike can even apologize to 11. Back at the pool, it's almost Billy's shift as Karen goes to talk to him about her missing last night. She goes to him and apologizes, and while doing so, Billy loses any focus on her words and he eventually attacks Karen and knocks her out cold, but he snaps back to reality and tells Karen to stay away from him. He is completely disoriented as he walks to his shift, and he feels extremely hot as if the sun is burning him alive. He realizes he has a giant sunburn and heads into the showers. He sees something growing on his body and goes to check it out, but as he touches it, he has a vision of the mind flare and hears otherworldly sounds. Heather comes in and asks Billy to take her to him, and Billy snaps into reality and realizes she never said that, but he decides to give into it and kidnap Heather. While at the mall, Steve and Dustin try and translate. Robin intervenes to swap turns with Steve so she can cure her ice cream slinging boredom. As Nancy and Jonathan go to visit Miss Driscoll, they go down into her basement where they discover fertilizer being torn apart by what seems like rat teeth. How does she know it's a rat? Well, to their surprise, it turns out she caught one of them. Jonathan takes photos of the rat as it crazily shakes and runs around its cage. But as Jonathan goes to reload, it stops and starts shaking violently as if something is hurting it. But Nancy grabs Jonathan's attention and they leave, as the rat eventually explodes within the cage and its remains transform into a running object. At the mall, 11 and Max go shopping and have fun while Mike, Lucas, and Will try and locate some sort of gift that will help Mike when he apologizes. After a while, Dustin and Robin get their first sentence: "The week is long." On the other side of the mall, the girls leave Starcourt and they find the boys outside. Knowing Mike was lying to her, as the bus arrives, she breaks up with him. Joyce decided to travel all the way to Scott Clark's house and talk to him about the magnets not working properly. They talk about how a large machine that creates its own electromagnetic field would need to be created in order to affect objects such as magnets, but it would cost way too much. But completely out of Joyce's mind, she missed the date with Hopper. The week is long. The silver cat feeds when blue meets yellow in the west. A trip to China sounds nice if you tread lightly. A message fully decoded now by Dustin, Steve, and Robin. They talk about what it could mean while Steve realizes that the code didn't come from Russia, but it came from there, right there in Starcourt. Billy travels back to Brimborn and takes Heather out of his trunk. He walks through the building, going down into the basement and setting her down, giving her to the growling beast. She screams as Billy watches. His sister and 11 have a sleepover. They talk and 11 travels into the void to see what the boys are doing and talking about. Hopper arrives home and, thinking Mike is in a room, is extremely mad but then extremely surprised to see Max. His night gets turned around. 11 and Max play a game to decide who to spy on in the void. The bottle lands on Billy, and so 11 enters the void. She sees his car running and heads towards it, hearing Billy talking to Heather, who's screaming. Within the void, Billy turns around, somehow sensing 11 watching him. The next morning, Will awakes Mike and Lucas, trying to get them to finally play Dungeons and Dragons with him like the old times. While Joyce travels to Hopper's, talking to him about the magnets, admitting that she missed their date to go and talk to Mr. Clark about them. They argue a bit until she asks Hopper what if it's them, the scientist from the lab. She asks him to take her to the lab to go investigate to prove to her that it's not them. So they both go and travel to the lab. 11 and Max go and talk to Billy at her house. They enter his room and he's not there, but they discover his bath is full of ice, as if he was trying to get himself cold. They then see a bucket with items of Heather's. They go to the pool and ask where Heather is, finding out that she didn't show up to work that day. They see a picture of Heather and 11 attempts to use the void to find her. Within the void, she sees Max's postbox, then a door, which upon opening she sees the bathtub filled with ice. Suddenly, Heather jumps out asking for her help, until she's dragged back into the bath and falls into the void, as 11 tries to grab her. Back at the mall, Steve and Dustin are spying around the mall looking for evil Russians. They eventually find someone who has a duffel bag, thinking he's the evil Russian. They follow him all around the mall until he eventually goes into jazzercise to teach dance. And Steve and Dustin realize they're terribly wrong. Robin gets a delivery at Scoops Ahoy and reads the name Lynx, thinking what if Lynx is a silver cat? So she looks around the mall, seeing a Chinese place, a shoe store, and the blue and yellow handles of the clock. And everything within the Russian code is suddenly connecting to the mall. Mike, Lucas, and Will play D&D until they get a phone call and think it's 11. After they start talking about girls again, Will asks them to keep playing, but Mike and Lucas joke about the campaign. Will gets rightfully pissed off and leaves to go home. They argue outside and Mike tells Will that they're not kids anymore, that things change, and Will rides away in the rain. Hopper and Joyce break into the lab and look around. They go to where the gate was and see nothing's there, that the holes have been filled, that it's all over. They talk about their PTSD from the events throughout the past couple years, and they also talk about how Joyce is planning to move, but he just wants her to feel safe here in Hawkins. But while talking, they hear noises from the lab. Hopper goes investigating and gets jumped by Grigory and they fight, and he knocks Hopper out as Joyce sees Grigory riding away on his motorbike. Back at the Byers, Mike and Lucas arrive to apologize, but Will is outside in Castle Byers. He feels like garbage, remembering remembering events that didn't involve the Upside Down whatsoever. Everything that was normal, all the good times they had as kids. He cries as he rips the pictures apart and destroys Castle Byers in rage. He tears it down one hit at a time. Nancy proposes her newspaper idea to the Post, but they instantly shut it down. After being made fun of, Jonathan tags along as they decide to go to Miss Driscoll's again. After no response, they go inside the house, already creating the excuse that she might have fallen, but they don't find her anywhere, and head down into the basement, seeing her eating the fertilizer, while Dustin, Steve, and Robin sit on the top of the mall, looking at the mall guards getting items imported. Eleven and Max arrive at Heather's, where her father Tom and mother Janet Holloway are eating dinner with Billy. But after talking with Billy, they see Heather, so they eventually leave, and while watching them go, Billy remembers Elle from somewhere, and has visions of her being the one who closed the gate, which seemingly activates him as Will gets the goosebumps and senses the evil. While back inside the Holloways, Billy and Heather knock out and kidnap Heather's parents. They take them to Brimborn, which passing is an ambulance carrying Miss Driscoll who wants to go back there, who wants to go into Brimborn, but is being taken to the hospital after Nancy and Jonathan called. But back inside, Tom and Janet see what seems to be a fleshy physical form of the Mind Flayer's figure, which grabs their faces, injecting something into them. Hopper wakes up in his cabin and throws up the next morning. Joyce and him talk about what happened, and Joyce tells Hopper that it wasn't a car he was driving. Eleven and Max awake as Lucas and Mike keep ringing, trying to get their attention and for them to come to Mike's house. They try and contact Dustin, who is currently watching over the imports at the mall, and they know that the guards who have guns don't want anyone seeing what's in those boxes. After Steve talks to them about possibly fighting the guard himself, Robin goes to buy something that'll help them. Tom is angry at Nancy and Jonathan, telling them facts. The facts that they disobeyed a direct order to drop the case, they falsely identified themselves as reporters, they broke into her house, she almost died on the way to the hospital, and he also reveals that she's a paranoid schizophrenic, but also tells them that they're both fired. Will tells everyone about his feelings, his senses of evil, the same sense he felt when the Mind Flayer was close. Eleven tells Will that she closed the gate, but Will says they might have locked the part of the Mind Flayer that was in Will inside of their world, with them, and that the Mind Flayer would want to attach himself to a new host. Hopper and Joyce arrive at the town hall. Hopper goes to talk to Mayor Klein about the motorcycle guy and knows he's lying to him, so Hopper threatens Klein to reveal more information, punching him and almost taking his finger off. Klein tells him that Gregory works with people who own Starcourt, that they own them all. They want to expand East Hawkins and want more land. So Hopper takes him from his office as they head to find the records of those land purchases. They find the documents and Klein warns them about what they're getting into. And Joyce puts together that maybe the machine might be a real thing, just not in the lab, but in one of the sold locations. Robin arrives back with the blueprints for Starcourt Mall. They talk about the air ducts so that they can travel straight from Scoops Ahoy to where they're trying to get into. They open the ducts and try and fit Dustin in, which is just not working. Robin recruits Erica to try and get her through the ducts as she'll fit. They organize a plan with her that she gets free food for life if she does it for them. Michael, Evan, Will, Lucas, and Max go to the pool and see Billy in full clothes. Will tells them all that the Mind Flayer will only use Billy if it needs him, not just every second every day. They remember that anything Upside Down related doesn't like heat, so they plan to do a sauna test. Back in the mall, Erica travels the vents as Hopper and Joyce enter one of the many locations but find nothing. Erica breaks in and gets to the room, opening the main doors successfully. They all head inside and open one of the boxes and prepare to find out what's truly inside. Steve turns and then pulls something out, a green liquid. While they study what it might be, the room shakes, then shakes more and more until they're unable to even open the door, but then they fall. They keep falling and can't get out until they eventually stop. They're stuck in the Russian elevator, even after climbing out, as they're way too far down. Back at the pool, the test commences. They lock the doors on him, turning the lights off, taunting him and directing him all the way to the sauna. 11 knocks Billy into the wall and they lock him in there, turning the heat up and beginning the real test. Nancy arrives at the hospital to visit Miss Driscoll, and inside notices weird behavior as her heart rate increases, way too fast. Back in the sauna, Billy keeps yelling and yelling for them to just let him out until he falls. He starts crying, telling them that it's not his fault, that he's done bad things, and that he made him do it, that a giant shadow made him do it. He keeps crying to Max when he finds a piece of the floor, but Will senses it. Billy is activated. Billy smashes the window and tries to get out until Lucas shoots him down and the lights begin flickering. The Mind Flayer prepares to leave Billy's body, becoming inhabitable as it did with Will. As in the hospital, Miss Driscoll is screaming. The hive mind is activated. Billy knocks the door open and faces 11. Eleven and Billy fight. 11 trying to knock Billy away, but Billy pushes back, dragging her around and grabbing her throat. But Mike hits Billy down and tries to hit him again until Billy grabs the pole, throwing it away and then confronting Mike. But 11 picks him up into the air and they both scream at each other as she throws him outside the building and he runs away. Billy talks to Heather about 11, that she knows about the mind flare, but their army grows larger and larger as the beast continues to feed and grow in size. Hopper and Joyce arrive at the next property, Hess's farmhouse. They go investigating and find Alexei and another scientist in the hidden basement, but Grigory is on his way and arrives at the farmhouse, walking above them all and heading down into the basement. Hopper aims a gun at Grigory's head and prepares to shoot, but Grigory calls his bluff, and Hopper does shoot, but misses as Grigory knocks him down and fights Hopper. They fight and Joyce tries her best to help, but fails. They grab Alexei and bring him with them as they leave the basement, as they cover it back up and Grigory shoots at them, and they head away from the farmhouse, now with Alexei as a hostage. Their car breaks down, and after trying to fix it, the car sparks a fuse, and then blows up, causing them to have to walk through the forest while Grigory searches for him. Alexei runs away from them and heads to a 7-Eleven. Inside, they grab drinks and supplies. Hopper goes outside and takes a random citizen's car, saying it's a police emergency. They take his car to transport the criminal and drive away. 11 tracks Hopper in the void and they know that he's heading to Illinois with Joyce while Nancy calls Jonathan and asks him to get Will on the phone, which worries both Nancy and Jonathan. The crew are talking about how to stop the mind flare, and Mike and Lucas get distracted talking about the girls again, but Nancy and Jonathan arrive at Mike's basement. Nancy shows them the temperature of Miss Driscoll being cold, and they talk about the hive mind and how they were both activated. They talk about Heather, which makes Jonathan and Nancy remember Tom's weird behavior, so they all get into the car and go. After staying overnight, workers eventually arrive at the elevator, taking the supplies. At first they're suspicious because they can smell Steve's piss, but they shrug it off, pack and leave. As the door shuts, Steve quickly jumps down and uses one of the jars to stop the door from shutting completely as they all get through. They see a super long hallway and begin walking. They realize they may be making a machine down there underneath the mall, and when Robin asks why do it in Hawkins, Steve and Dustin wonder if the Russians know about the Upside Down. They arrive at a hub of some sorts, where Erica sees a store from inside the mall. It all seemingly leads down there. They all sneak across the hub and enter a random area, but there's a Russian guy in there. Robin tries to convince him not to shoot, but Steve runs to him and fights him, and surprisingly beats him. They grab his keycard, but up a flight of stairs, they all see through the windows the gate being powered and staying opened by the machine. It seems they're making it bigger and bigger, and Steve and Dustin know exactly what they're looking at, the gate. They head back, but the Russian guard Steve beat is no longer there. He went and got help. They all run as security chases them, and they head towards the gate. They run downstairs, beating guards over and run away. Steve and Robin make sure Dustin and Erica can escape as they hold the door, eventually being surrounded. At the hallways, 11 forces the door open as they all look for clues about what's happened. It seems as though all the Flayed are eating chemicals and maybe they're making something. They follow the clues and realize that Billy and Heather must have taken them somewhere. Miss Driscoll wanted to go to some place and they all agree they should just take her there and find out the source, where it's all coming from and where all the Flayed are being taken. They all go to the hospital and Jonathan and Nancy go to see Miss Driscoll, but inside they see no one there. She's gone. Then Tom arrives and Jonathan hits him with a flower pot, but outside in the hall Bruce appears. The hive mind is activated. They run down the hallway and go inside of a room, locking it, trying to call the front desk. Bruce smashes the glass window and unlocks the door. Jonathan gets strangled by him and Nancy gets flicked away. Bruce grabs a chair and hits Jonathan's back, but Nancy grabs a pair of scissors and stabs him in the back. Nancy runs out the room with Bruce following as Jonathan tries to get himself back up, but Tom knocks him back down. Tom knocks Jonathan around and Nancy hides. Jonathan tries to grab a pair of scissors, but Tom hits him down and grabs the scissors himself, about to stab Jonathan. But Nancy hits Bruce with a fire extinguisher, so due to the hive mind, Tom drops the scissors in pain. Jonathan picks them back up and stabs Tom as Nancy hits Bruce again and again. Downstairs, the rest of the crew see the lights flickering as Tom and Bruce melt into complete flesh and head to each other. They combine and mix to form one big monster. The monster growls at them and heads towards Nancy as she runs through the halls. Nancy locks herself in a room, but the monster itself deforms and flows through the door and reforms inside the room. Jonathan can't get in to help as the kids climb the stairs to reach them. The monster fully takes shape and hits Nancy across the room. The monster goes to Nancy and squeals right in her face, but 11 knocks the door open and pushes the monster around the room. Right, left, up, down, and then all the way out the window. They all run outside and see the monster deform and head into the sewers, making its way to the larger, fleshy monster, the physical form of the mind flare. Hopper, Joyce, and Alexei arrive at Murray's, and they learn that Murray knows Russian. Joyce goes and yells at Murray, which honestly scares him. Mayor Klein is setting up the 4th of July celebrations at Hawkins Fairgrounds, but Grigory arrives and talks to Klein. The Russians want Klein to find Hopper, and Klein tells him to bring some backup next time. Back at Murray's, Hopper arrives and gives Alexei food and drinks. They ask Alexei questions, and he annoys Hopper to the point Hopper throws him out and gives him keys to the car, telling him he can go and get the Slurpee himself. Hopper thinks he won't drive away, but Alexei unlocks himself and gets in the car, ready to leave. He begins driving away, but when they go outside, they realize Alexei didn't leave and decides to return to them. Back under the mall, Dustin tells Erica about everything that's happened. They're trying to stop one of the fans so they can crawl through and away, and Dustin realizes Erica is a nerd. But with Steve, they interrogate him and keep hitting him until he answers their questions, and they hit him one more time until he's knocked out, and they drag him into a different room with Robin, and they put both of them in chairs and leave them there. Back in the void, Eleven searches for the Flayed, but can't find them for some reason. They all talk about what's going on, and Mike slips that he loves Elle, but she eventually finds Billy. Back at Murray's, they learn that they tried to make a gate in Russia, but it hasn't worked so far. Alexei tells them that they're opening a doorway between worlds, and Hopper and Joyce both realize exactly what's happening. Alexei tells them that location matters. The Russians somehow knew the doorway was opened here once, so they know it can work again. Alexei tells them that they can't actually get there as it's a fortress guarded by Russians. It's impossible. Impossible turned possible as Dustin and Erica leave the vents and find a vehicle. They find a cage that Erica wonders if they might be trapping a Demogorgon in. She finds a dangerous weapon and they decide to drive. Robin tries screaming for help and Steve wakes up. They plan to go and grab scissors so they can break out, but they fail. And on the floor they bond, until the Russians walk in, pick their chairs up and drug them. After more time in the void, Eleven finds Billy again, just sitting in his room. But on the 4th of July? No way! The Mind Flayer obviously wants them to find Billy so he can find out where they are. But Eleven remembers how she went through Terry's past and decides to try and do the same with Billy's past. Billy grabs her and she falls back in the void. She successfully enters his mind, seeing Billy's mother watching Billy surf the waves. But Eleven sees the clouds of the Upside Down inside Billy's mind and heads towards it. She sees Billy's father yelling at him and Billy running away. She then sees Billy's mother and father argue, Billy trying to get in the way and stop his dad from hurting her, but his dad pushes him out the way and abuses her. After that happened, his mother left and Billy started becoming abusive, being influenced by his father. She sees Billy meet Max for the first time and eventually sees the source, seeing Brimborn. They tell Eleven to get out the void now they know where the source is, but Eleven comes back to an empty cabin. Everyone is gone. No one is there. She screams for Mike, but Billy enters the empty cabin. Outside of the void, back at Hawkins, all the Flayed stop celebrating 4th of July and head to Brimborn. Billy tells Eleven they've been building an army, a monster, for Eleven and just for her. He tells her it's time and he'll kill her, her friends, and then everyone. Eleven knocks Billy out of her head as she reawakens in the cabin back in reality. Back in Brimborn, all of the Flayed, and I mean all of the Flayed, are melting, joining and combining with the Mind Flare as it grows larger and larger, breaking out of Brimborn and ready to begin its hunt. At Murray's, Hopper gets someone to tell Dr. Owens that they're opening a gate, that there's an entrance at Starcourt Mall and Hopper knows how to get there, but they need to bring lots of backup. He hangs up, but then Joyce calls back and yells at the guy on the other side to tell Dr. Owens to bring his men to Hawkins right now. After the call, they all go and travel back to Hawkins. Steve and Robin shout at the Russians that they might have messed up the drugs because they just feel good, as if they're on normal drugs. The Russians enter and ask them who they work for. Steve once again tells them that they work for Scoops Ahoy, and they got there by accident. They start to cut Steve's finger, but Robin tells them they just heard a code that the Russians accidentally broadcasted their message around town. They tell them that Dustin probably called Hopper, who called the military, and the Russians ask Steve if that's so. And Steve says, yeah, it is, as right on cue the alarms start going off. The main boss runs to see what's wrong, to see a hole in the ground that goes who knows how far down. Dustin runs in and shocks the doctor, freeing them both, and they drive away to the elevator. Dustin uses the keycard to activate the elevator and they head up to the mall. They head outside, but the Russians are heading straight for them, so they all run back inside the mall and sneak into a showing of Back to the Future so the Russians don't find them. Erica watches over Steve and Robin as Dustin goes to try and get in communication with anyone. The gang can hear the fireworks from Mayor Klein's fun fair at Hopper's cabin. Eleven tells them all what happened in the vision, what Billy told her about, but Nancy hears something among the fireworks. They all head outside and see the giant mind flare in the distance heading right towards them. The whole group grabs supplies and weapons and begin boarding up Hopper's cabin, shutting all the doors for no surprises. All getting away from the windows and joining together. They hear it get closer and closer until it breaks through and attacks 11, but Jonathan hits it with an axe so it knocks him out the way. It goes to kill Jonathan, but Nancy shoots it twice until she runs out of bullets. So it goes to kill Nancy until 11 grabs it with her powers and rips it apart. It retreats but then comes back, not just one but two this time. 11 holds them both and then snaps them both apart, but no rest as the mind flare breaks through and grabs 11's leg. They all try and save 11 as Nancy shoots it and Lucas keeps chopping it apart with his axe. They all save 11 but there's a part of it on her leg. Mike rips it off and 11 screams. The monster stares at all of them and 11 gets up and rips its face to shreds. They all run out the cabin while the mind flare is distracted and they get in the car and drive away. Hopper, Joyce, Murray and Alexi all head to Hawkins while Alexi gives them information on how to properly close the gate, while the crew arrive at a gas station and start getting supplies as 11 is wounded really badly. Lucas and Will find the best fireworks in town as Mike and 11 talk, but then hear Dustin on the walkie-talkie. But Mike can't hear them properly as Dustin's batteries die. Dustin heads back asking for batteries but notices the drugged Steve and Robin are completely gone as they're both drinking from a water fountain outside. They stare at the ceiling but get extremely sick and rush to the bathroom as they throw up. While at the fair, Hopper and Joyce are trying to find their kids, but Klein sees them both and goes to call Gregory. 11 uses the void and she finds Dustin at the movies. They all head out to go to the mall with Lucas's fireworks, but back in the store, 11's blood on the floor starts coming alive. Back in the mall, Steve and Robin talk, and before Steve asks Robin to date him, Robin comes out to him about being a lesbian before Dustin and Erica find them in the bathroom. Back at the station, Billy arrives and finds the blood from 11. He's right on their trail. Murray and Alexi talk about closing the gate and Murray takes him to the fair as Joyce and Hopper see the Wheelers and learn that they don't know where the kids are either. Dustin, Steve, Robin and Erica join the crowd after the movie finishes so they can blend in and exit the mall. It works, but they see the Russians at the door checking security, so they all run the other way, heading down the stairs. Alexi is having fun at the fair and wins the big prize. He walks to show Murray the prize but is stopped by Gregory as he finds and then shoots Alexi. Murray helps Alexi and goes to find Hopper and Joyce to warn them about the Russians being there with them and that they got Alexi, and Hopper sees the Russians and they run away. Russians are absolutely everywhere, so Hopper sends Joyce to go find Murray, get in the car and meet him around the back. Hopper goes into a giant funhouse and begins fighting. Joyce and Murray go back to Alexi and realize that he's dead, as Hopper beats up the Russian and steals his walkie-talkie and gun. And inside the mirror maze, Gregory searches for Hopper, and Hopper comes out of nowhere and shoots Gregory multiple times. More Russians are coming, so Hopper leaves the funhouse and goes down the slide, running to Joyce and Murray as they drive off away from the fair, but as they're driving away, Murray translates that the Russians have found the kids somewhere in the lower level of the mall, so they head straight for it. Within the mall, the Russians are looking around and getting closer and closer, about to kill all four of them until a car starts going off randomly and then hits all the Russians away. Dustin, Steve, Robin and Erica see all the Russians on the ground and then see 11 and the crew, and the two groups unite. They all talk to each other about some of the stuff they've learned until 11 walks away from the group and falls to the ground. They all go to 11 as they check her leg. There's a lot of pus and something moving around within it. They don't know what to do as 11 screams. Jonathan goes to find a knife, then heats it up. He gives 11 a spoon to stop her from screaming, and Jonathan tries to cut her leg open and puts his hand in her leg and tries to grab the moving piece out of her. After a lot of screaming, they stop and 11 uses her powers to get it out of her leg herself, flinging it far away as Hopper steps on it, and now everyone is at the mall and unites. They all talk about the new mind flare monster and how it destroyed Hopper's cabin. They all talk about the fact that they need to close the gate again. Murray shows them the blueprints of the underground, and Dustin and Erica tell them about the Russian facility as they were just down there. Hopper tells them to navigate them. They need to drive to Cerebro. Hopper gives them the keys and Steve drives Dustin, Robin, and Erica to Cerebro. Hopper, Joyce, and Murray head into the elevator as Mike, 11, Max, Lucas, Will, Jonathan, and Nancy plan to drive away to somewhere safe, but the car doesn't start. They wonder why the ignition cable is gone as Billy's car rumbles. Nancy tells the kids to go into the mall as Billy watches. The three heading to the gate talk about their plan while they head down the elevator, and as it opens they are instantly spotted by the Russians, and when Murray messes up, Hopper shoots and kills literally all of them. The Scoops troop arrive at Cerebro as the mall group are all trapped as Billy disabled their car. Mike keeps trying to get in contact with the Scoops troop as Nancy spots one of the cars inside the mall, and they realize they don't need the car to work, just the ignition cable. They all try and flip it over but can't, so 11 gives it a try. Underground, the Russian group convinces the guard to let them through and they find the vent. The Scoops troop radio to them and help Murray navigate the vents. Above them, the mall group flip the car all the way over as 11 tries to break a Coca-Cola can again. She's lost her powers entirely as she can't do it. While Nancy and Jonathan look for a cable, Will gets goosebumps and Max hears something above them. Mike looks up and sees it, warning the the others about it as the mind flare breaks through the glass roof and enters the mall. Gregory arrives underground as Murray keeps navigating the vents. The Scoops troop all notice the mall lights flickering and radio to them, and instead of the crew, the mind flare picks up and screams at them. Lucas, Nancy, Jonathan and Will are hiding together as Mike, 11 and Max are hiding together. The Scoops troop can't contact them, so Steve and Robin go to the mall to help. The mind flare searches around the mall looking for any of the crew. Mike, 11 and Max run into the gap to try and escape the mall, but the mind flare hears and sends out its grabbers to find them. As Murray arrives in the control room, the mind flare grabbers keep searching as Murray turns off a bunch of switches and the Russians set the alarm off. Lucas uses his wrist rocket and shoots a balloon that's in the store across from Mike, 11 and Max. The mind flare gets distracted and both groups head out the mall. Underground, Hopper and Joyce arrive at the safe that holds the 2 keys they need to shut the gate, and the passcode is Planck's constant, but they're wrong about what it is. But Dustin knows someone who might remember it. The mall group head into the car as Billy drives towards them full force as Nancy shoots. Billy gets closer and closer, about to hit Nancy and the crew, but Steve drives directly into him. The mind flare starts heading towards them as Steve and Robin enter the mall group's car. Dustin contacts Susie, and as the mind flare is chasing after the mall group, he tries to get Planck's constant off of her, but she won't give it to them unless he makes up for not talking to her right now. So Dustin and Susie do a never-ending story, and straight after, Susie gives them the code, and it works as Hopper grabs the suitcase with the keys. Billy gets out of his burning car and sees Mike, 11 and Max trying to escape the mall. They see Billy and run back inside, Max shutting the gate behind them. The mind flare randomly turns around to go and hunt 11 as Billy catches and reopens the gate. The Russians are trying to get into the control room as Hopper and Joyce successfully reach the main key room. Billy gets inside and Max tries to snap him to reality but is slapped by Billy, and Billy knocks Mike to the ground and then knocks 11 out. Hopper and Joyce put the keys in and prepare to shut the gate on 3, but out of nowhere, Gregory arrives and hits Hopper on the back, and they all begin fighting. Upstairs, Billy takes 11 all the way to the main lobby of the mall and places her down, ready for the mind flare. It enters and prepares to take 11, reaching out to her until it gets hit by a firework. Lucas and the gang all fight by throwing fireworks at the mind flare. Gregory and Hopper fight all the way to the front of the gate's machine, as upstairs the mind flare is being hurt as they keep throwing fireworks at it, which is hurting Billy due to the hive mind. 11 tries to escape but Billy drags her back. Below, Joyce gets back up and sees Hopper fighting Gregory. The mall group are all running out of time, running out of fireworks, and Dustin screams for them to close it now. Max reawakes and helps Mike back up. As the mind flare keeps getting hit, Billy keeps getting affected, and 11 uses this opportunity to talk through to Billy, to talk to him about his mother and one of his happiest memories in his life. Hopper pulls Gregory to the machine, hurting him. Hopper then throws him in it, killing Gregory, and the machine starts to go wild after that interference. The mall group run out of fireworks, and the mind flare instantly heads to take 11. Mike and Max see the mind flare facing 11 and Billy as it reaches for her again, but this time, Billy catches it. Billy gets hit multiple times by the mind flare. Dustin yells for Joyce to close the gate now, right now. Hopper knows he can't get back and turns to Joyce. The mind flare hits Billy one more time, ripping parts of Billy straight out of him, as Hopper smiles and nods at Joyce, and she twists both keys at once. The machine malfunctions and blows up entirely, closing the gate. Thanks to this, the mind flare rustles around and dies in the mall. Joyce looks over to where Hopper was and he's gone. But before it blew up, Hopper decided to jump down into the empty hole between the gate and the machine, eventually reawakening. Max goes to Billy and he apologizes to her and dies in her arms, as Joyce heads further to where Hopper stood. But Murray grabs her and tells her they need to go now, as the Russians head inside to get them both. Hopper climbs the ladder to get back up to where the machine was, but the Russians find him still there and knock him out cold. Dustin and Erica turn around to see the US military flying over and eventually arriving at Starcourt. Dr. Owen's leading charge towards the now burning mall. The army infiltrates the Russian base and searches everywhere, and Dr. Owen sees the remains of the now closed gate. Outside the mall, Joyce and Will reunite as 11 sees her, but she realizes there's no Hopper. She knows this means Hopper is dead and can't believe it. Hopper, however, was taken by the Russians all the way back to Russia. He's asked who he works for and keeps repeating he works for no one, so they put him in the elephant, which creates only one breathing source, so they hold it to stop him from breathing. After struggling for ages, Hopper is dragged, knocked out. They realize he's still alive and they send Hopper to Kamchatka. There, they shave his head completely and begin preparing him for the prison. Dmitri sends him to his permanent room as one of the Russian prison guards. 3 months after the burning at Starcourt, Larry Klein is arrested and ousted as mayor, and the public begin to believe possible Satanism is to blame. Steve and Robin go to apply at Hawkins' family video and they both get the job. The buyers, however, are moving away from Hawkins with 11, Joyce taking her from Hopper's hands. Everyone helps them move and pack items, homes, and Jonathan and Nancy say goodbye as 11 attempts to use her powers again, but nothing happens. Mike promises her that her powers will come back one day, and also that they will be able to see each other at Thanksgiving. But 11 confronts Mike about the love stuff he said ages ago, and 11 tells him that she loves him too, and they kiss. Joyce finds the letter that she wrote for him that was going to be used for Mike and 11, but after 11 asks about it, Joyce realizes he never actually got to reading it. So 11 sits and reads through his emotional letter as all of them say their final goodbyes to the Byers. All the kids split up from Will and 11, and Nancy splits with Jonathan, as Joyce leaves the house feeling like this is the right decision. After the Byers begin driving away, the group rides away from the Byers' home one final time. Sometime after, Max gets home and continues to miss Billy a whole lot, as Dustin and Lucas give Erica Will's old Dungeons & Dragons set, and as the Byers drive out of Hawkins for good. Throughout the months between the Byers leaving Hawkins in March 21st, 1986, in California, Joyce gets a home job. Jonathan becomes a stoner with his new friend Argyle, and Will and 11 go to a new school, which unfortunately she's getting bullied at, mostly by a girl named Angela, but she continuously writes to Mike, who always writes back. While back at Hawkins, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Max join Hawkins High School. The boys join a Dungeons & Dragons club named Hellfire, run by Eddie Munson, who's been held back quite a bit as Dungeon Master, and other students like Gareth, Jeff, and this guy too, while Max reluctantly sees a counselor to deal with her brother's death, and she's now moved due to her stepfather, Billy's father, leaving. On a side note, Officer Powell becomes the new chief of police. At a prep rally at the school for their upcoming basketball game, Jason Carver gives a speech dedicated to the people who have died due to the strange events over the past few years. He reveals that the championship game will be tonight, but that means Lucas will have to skip out on their D&D campaign tonight. So Mike and Dustin confront Lucas about it, but Lucas tells him that he's sick of being bullied and seen as a loser, and that this is his chance to change people's perspective, so he respectively asks them to understand and to hopefully move back the campaign. At the Byers, Joyce gets a weird package from Russia. She opens it and sees nothing but a Russian doll. Whilst at school, 11 presents her diorama of Hopper and her old cabin for a project. Angela gives her grief, trying to be specific about the project, and 11 barely gets through it. Max goes to see the counselor, seeing Chrissy, Jason's girlfriend, leave terrified. She talks to Miss Kelly and lies about her sleeping fine, and she doesn't open up even after a push from Miss Kelly. After her meeting, Lucas invites her to the game and talks to Max about how he's worried she's not okay. She tells him that she's just changed, and goes to the bathroom to take pills for her headaches, but she hears Chrissy throwing up. And after checking in with her then leaving, Chrissy hears her mother, and then sees a monster's feet below the stall, and her abusive mother bangs on the stall until she snaps back into reality. Eddie reads a newspaper on how Dungeons & Dragons influences children into Satanism and murder. Mike and Dustin go and sit with them and ask them about moving the game, and no one seems to like the idea. And Eddie tells them that he sees them as the ones who'll pass the torch to when he leaves Hawkins High, and he tells them they need to go and find someone else as a replacement. So Mike and Dustin go around the school, searching for someone, and after finding no one at Hawkins High, they eventually go to get someone who attends Hawkins Middle. Chrissy goes to an undisclosed location behind the school in order to buy drugs from Eddie, but before he arrives, she has a hallucination of a clock in a tree as it chimes and spiders crawl out of it. She snaps out of it when Eddie meets her, and after they talk, he's ready to sell it to her, until she asks for something stronger. 11 walks out of class as normal, but she gets confronted and bullied by Angela and her friends, who destroy her diorama. 11 attempts to use her powers against Angela, but she fails, and has a huge embarrassing moment until the teacher arrives and takes Angela away, knowing it was her who did that to 11. After a call with Murray, Joyce needs to check whether there's an explosive device in the doll. After all, she ruined Rush's plans with the gate not even a year ago, so she destroys the doll with a rock and reads a letter that was within it, reading "Hop is alive, he looks forward to date, please to make reservation, cool," and then the number. Open 12 day PETT, no goved, please, kind regards, Enzo. The championship game comes around for Lucas as Vecna's curse comes around for Mike, Dustin, and Erica, the newest recruit, who at first gets rejected by Eddie until Erica argues and convinces him to change his mind. Both games begin and go smoothly, until eventually it all depends on the Sinclairs. Lucas shoots the ball in the final seconds of the game as Erica rolls the dice as their last chance to kill Vecna. Lucas scores as Erica rolls a 20, and both the Sinclairs win their games. Max overhears the game results, and when feeding her dogs, sees Chrissy head into Eddie's trailer, Eddie's looking for the Special K to sell to her, but while he looks for it in his room, she hears the grandfather clock and goes to Eddie, only to see it's not Eddie in his room, it's his mother. She goes outside the room and she's no longer in the Munson trailer, but her own house. She sees her father and screams as Eddie finally finds the drug. He goes to give it to Chrissy, but she's frozen dead still. He tries to snap Chrissy out of her trance as Chrissy runs to the front door, trying to get out, only to see Henry Creel walk down the stairs, telling Chrissy that her suffering is at an end. He reaches for Chrissy as in the real world she begins to float to the top of the trailer. All her bones crack in her body and Eddie screams as her eyes close themselves in. The next morning, Max sees the police arrive at Eddie's, and after trying to see what's happening, she sees Chrissy's body on the floor. Argyle, Jonathan, Will and Eleven sit at the airport as Mike arrives in California. Eleven tells him she has a whole day planned, so they go and fulfill those plans as Maria also arrives in California and heads to the buyers. Betty's Burgers is being used as a hangout spot for the basketball team, and Lucas throws up in the toilet as they obviously had a heavy night last night. They hear the story on the news before Jason sees the police coming to them, and he knows that it's not good news. The police ask him questions about her, and when they ask about drugs and things Chrissy will never do, they mention Eddie, and Jason thinks Eddie did this to her, which the police can't deny it. So the basketball team with Lucas devise a plan to find Eddie and get revenge before Eddie kills again. Max arrives at Dustin's and tells him what she saw, that Eddie didn't look like he just killed someone, he looked like he saw something do it. At first they deny it being upside down related as the gates shut, but they aren't so sure. Only Eddie knows what happened, so they head out to find him. Mari and Joyce talk about the situation and they decide to give the number a call in a safe way, while Mike, Eleven and Will go to the roller rink for fun. But Will notices that she's lying to him about having friends and going to parties there. But back in Hawkins, Dustin and Max ride to Hawkins' family video and use their computer to find the numbers of all his friends as they fill Steve and Robin in on what's happening, as Nancy and Fred Benson talk to the police to enter the area of a crime scene to see Max. But the police asks about Fred and talks to him about the kid he murdered, his scar from the car crash, and the police calls him a murderer. Fred snaps out of it and they're both allowed to check in on their friend. Back in the roller rink, Angela arrives, and Mike and her meet. Eleven shouldn't have used her name as the name of her friend, as Angela takes her out to the rink, and Will sees a camera guy in the rink setting up to record her, so he tells Mike the truth. And as Angela tells Eleven to stay put in the middle of the rink, the DJ changes the song to Wipeout, as everyone calls Eleven a freak. Mike goes to the DJ and tells him to stop the song, and when he does, one of Angela's friends pour a drink all over Eleven as everyone laughs, and Eleven glides away. Mike and Will look for Eleven, and Will confronts Mike about him avoiding him all day, while Eleven is crying in the supply room. She sees them all laughing about the footage and goes to Angela, asking her to apologize and tell Mike they're really friends. Angela laughs it off, mentions how she can't talk to Hopper about it, and they walk away. Eleven gets extremely mad, grabbing someone else's roller skate and preparing for a hit, and she calls Angela's name. Angela turns around and Eleven smacks her on the nose and Angela starts bleeding a lot. Mike and Will see what's happening and Eleven cries. After Joyce and Murray set up, they call the number, learning they'll need to pay a $40,000 deposit to fish and fly in Alaska to a man named Yuri. Enzo hangs up the call and they try and figure out what a woman in the background was saying, so they take it to Jonathan's speakers and learn Enzo might be a prison guard who Hopper bribed. Max hears about Reefer Rick, who's Eddie's supplier, and Eddie crashes there sometimes, but they don't have his full name so they can't find his address. But Robin realizes they might not need a last name. They look at all the Ricks who's been there borrowing movies and find a Rick who's been borrowing a lot of Cheech and Chong, so they think they found the right one and head to his house. Nancy goes to talk to Eddie's uncle, Wayne Munson, while Fred starts to hear the clock chime. Wayne tells Nancy that Victor Creel might have something to do with it, while Fred now sees the clock in the grave in the woods. He sees a group of people calling him a murderer and he runs. The crew arrive at Rex and no one's home, so they all go around to the back of the house and see the boathouse with the door open slightly. They check all around the shed and find out someone's actually been there. Steve pokes around a boat with junk covering it, and when he turns to talk to Dustin, Eddie jumps out, taking Steve as a hostage and pointing a broken bottle at his throat. Dustin calms him down and he lets go of Steve. They ask Eddie what happened and Eddie claims that they won't believe him, but Max tells him to try them, as they've all seen Stranger Things. Eddie explains to them exactly what happened and says he sounds crazy, but Dustin readies Eddie to prepare for what he's about to tell him. and Dustin explains to Eddie about the Upside Down, and they compare the recent events to Vecna's curse and Vecna himself. Nancy keeps looking for Fred and reports him missing to the officer. Fred runs into the road and sees a burning car, exactly how it was in his crash. Fred sees the kid burning alive, and he falls backwards into a grave. He sees a large tunnel connecting to the grave and Vecna walking down it. Vecna confronts Fred, eventually reaching for him, and in the real world, Fred levitates in the sky, and his bones crack, eyes close in, and he falls dead in the middle of the road. After killing Fred, Vecna lowers in the Upside Down and detaches himself as he's seemingly feeding the Upside Down. After seeing the photos of the recent murders, the US military arrive at Dr. Owens, and they tell him about the murders, whether they remind him of anything. Jack Sullivan says that everything can be traced back to 11, and maybe she's doing remote assassinations. Dr. Owens tells him that 11 is dead, but Jack isn't convinced, and the military search their home for any evidence about her whereabouts, and they fly off. When Jonathan and Argyle finally arrive at the roller rink, they all head home. Upon arriving, they see Murray cooking risotto. They all have dinner, and Joyce lets everyone know she's heading to Alaska for a conference tomorrow. She tells the currently high Jonathan to look after everyone while she's gone, and the roller rink incident comes up. Mike saying Angela didn't look too okay, so Eleven gets up and heads into her room pissed off. The basketball team heads out to find Eddie, as Eddie and the crew brainstorm about what they could do against Vecna. But while talking, the police and ambulances drive past to take away Fred's body. Nancy gets interviewed as the Hawkins crew arrive, and when she sees them, she feels comforted, but also frightened, as she knows what this could all be leading to. Mike and Eleven talk about how they're falling apart as the police arrive at the Byers. They've come to arrest Eleven, and they take her to the station. Jonathan goes to call Joyce, but she's on the plane with Murray as they leave for Alaska to start the journey to save Hopper. Hopper, however, is continuing to work in Russia when Dmitri talks to Hopper about how Joyce is actually coming like they planned. He knocks Hopper out to seem like nothing suspicious is going on. The Hawkins group talk about how it's connected to the Upside Down, and they talk about Vecna. They talk about the victims and how they seemingly saw something before they died. They realize that if you saw a monster, you wouldn't go to the police, you'd go to your shrink. The Hawkins crew go to visit Miss Kelly's, but Nancy and Robin split from the group to go and follow Nancy's lead about Victor, seeing if he has anything to do with it at all. Back at Eddie's trailer, a gate is opening to the Upside Down. Within the Upside Down, Vecna prepares to target his next victim as he rises. Within his own void, he chooses Patrick. As the basketball team arrive at one of Eddie's friends' houses, they see the Corrid Coffin, their band, practicing, and they confront him about Eddie's whereabouts. Gareth tells them that Dustin might have found him because he was calling around asking for Eddie. At the police station, Eleven gets put into the system and taken away, and the boys can't see her without her mum, who is currently flying far away. Hopper asks another inmate if he can help him out, and trades soup with him for the inmate to agree to hitting his ankle near the chains for whatever reason Hopper has. The other inmate hits over and over again as Hopper sucks up the pain. Back in Hawkins, Nancy and Robin arrive at the Hawkins library as Max visits Miss Kelly and tries to get her to tell her about anything Chrissy said, but she doesn't say anything. When Max goes to the bathroom, she sees the keys to the school and takes them, running out the house for them to drive away. The basketball team arrive at Dustin's and knocks, but no one's home. Lucas sneaks into Dustin's room and radios to him, and Dustin tells Lucas they found Eddie and to meet at the school. Before Lucas tells them about the basketball team, they ask Lucas what the hell he's doing. Lucas tells him that he was looking for clues and that he has Eddie's location. Nancy and Robin find something on Victor Creel that he was put into Penthurst Asylum and claimed a demon was in his home. The two leave as Dustin tells them to meet at the school. They enter Miss Kelly's office and look through their files, noticing they all visited her. The basketball group look around Hopper's cabin as Lucas leads them out the back and runs from them, heading to the school. While reading the files, Max learns that Chrissy and Fred had the exact same symptoms as her, and she hears the clock chime and a name being called from outside of the office. Max follows the chimes and sees the clock in the wall. Dr. Owens intercepts Eleven's path as Joyce and Murray arrive. After a long day, Hopper arrives in his cell and puts his chains through the damage of his skin, thanks to the other inmate. Dr. Owens talks to Eleven about how Hawkins is in danger. Her friends are in the eye of the storm, but that he may have a way to bring her powers back. But if she wants to get them back, they need to leave right now as the military is out looking for them. So she agrees and they leave as Dr. Owens' crews arrive at the Byers in order to let them know what's going on and to stay there for protection. Nancy and Robin rush into the school and Max shows them where the clock was. She talks to them about the symptoms of being under Vector's curse, and she figures out she might die tomorrow. They hear something enter the school, so they go investigate and hear incoming running. But it just turns out it was Lucas. He tells Dustin about the basketball team coming for Eddie and Dustin, but they tell Lucas about Max. They head to the Wheelers and talk about Victor's incident, and that he's the only known survivor. They talk about how the Upside Down could have existed since the dawn of time, but they wonder how Vecna is even attacking people with no gate. Nancy and Robin come up with a plan to lie their way into Penthurst and end up being able to speak with Victor. Victor. After they leave, Mac finishes writing and hands out letters to everyone, and only for them to read when she dies. Max ends up deciding to travel to East Hawkins and convinces Steve to take them, and when entering the car, Max hears the chimes of the grandfather clock. At the Byers, they're basically under house arrest, as Jonathan comes up with a plan to hail Argyle to their house so they can escape. So the agents call Surfer Boy's Pizza and they grab a snack. Mike and Will start packing and talk about everything, why he might have been avoiding Will, and how they should work as a team, as best friends. Will likes that idea as Argyle heads to the Byers. Jonathan comes in and they prepare to leave, Will grabbing his painting as the agents go grab the door. It isn't pizza though, it's the army. They shoot Agent Wallace and Jonathan goes to look and see soldiers fight Agent Harmon. He runs back into the den as the glass breaks, so they run out and hide. They follow the agent around the house until they make a final run for it and Harmon gets shot. Argyle arrives and they all get in, yelling at him to drive. Argyle sees the soldier and upon more yelling, finally drives away. Joyce and Murray arrive at Fish and Fly and meet with Yuri. They give him his money, but he recommends they stay for some coffee while they wait, as he needs to count the money. Back in the prison, Hopper decides to break his pickaxe willingly and goes to grab another one. A guard gets one for him, but he goes inside and knocks out the guard. The other guards ask where the American went as he tries to pull the chains through the gap of his skin. The guard sees him trying to escape and gets him to face him with his hands up. So Hopper faces him with his hands holding the chains going across his face. They fight and throw each other around, but eventually the guard opens fire to alert the others. He kills the guard and blocks the entrance as the other guards try and get in. He climbs the roof and jumps off as they get into the shed and see dynamite lit. It explodes and kills a bunch of the guards, and Hopper gets in a snowmobile and successfully escapes. At Penhurst, Nancy and Robin arrive to meet with the director and get to go and visit Victor as Max gives letters to each of her family members. But unknowingly to her, her mum is just outside hanging laundry. She talks to her mum who came home early and tells her she's scared because of the murders. They hug and she tells Max it's okay until the sky turns dark, and it turns out she's not hugging her mum but hugging Vecna. Vecna threatens her and tells her that she's running out of time, and Max falls out of the vision, realizing her mother wasn't even there in the first place. She gets back in her car and they drive off. As in Penhurst Asylum, Nancy and Robin talk to Victor. They get his attention by mentioning how they believe his story, and that the same thing that killed his family might be back. Yuri counts all the money and makes a phone call to Dimitri as Hopper gets into the safe house he set up for him. But it turns out Yuri got more pay from the prison itself, so he gives up Hopper's location, turns Dimitri in, and kidnaps Joyce and Murray. The Hawkins group arrive at the graveyard, and after a small talk with Lucas, she goes to talk to Billy's grave. Victor explains what happened to him and his family to Nancy and Robin. He claims an angel saved him. They ask about the angel, but he just starts humming. Before they can get any more information, the director interrupts after finding out they're not who they say they are. Back at the graveyard, Max reads her emotional letter to Billy about everything that's happened since he's been gone, and that despite everything, she wishes he was still there. After she finishes her speech, the sky becomes night, and Steve notices that she's been sitting there for too long. He goes to her but notices Max in a trance. He yells for Dustin and Lucas to come help, and they run to her immediately. Within her vision, she sees Billy again, and Billy tells Max that there was a part of her that wanted him to die that day. He confronts Max, saying that he's here to end her suffering, and she falls, looking back to see Vecna take Billy's place. She runs through the graveyard, as in the real world, Dustin goes to call Nancy and Robin. At Penhurst, Robin makes the connection about music to the story and how music might be a lifeline to reality, so they try and outrun the guards and eventually get to their car. They drive away and answer Dustin's code red. Within her vision, Max sees a red fog, seemingly calling to her, so she walks into it. Dustin, however, grabs a bunch of mixtapes and heads to the others. Max arrives at a corrupted place within her vision that she's never ever seen before, as Dustin asks what her favorite song is. Vecna tells her that she shouldn't be there, finding and then capturing Max. He puts her up on one of the poles as they get running up the hill by Kate Bush and play it. They see the portal and Vecna tells Max that she can't be saved now, as the vines strangle her. He reaches for her, and in the real world, she begins levitating into the air. Max sees the portal and closes her eyes, remembering every happy memory that's happened to her with her friends at Hawkins. She reaches out and pulls a part of Vecna out, which causes him to let her go momentarily. She begins running away and Vecna tries to get her, but Max runs and runs, eventually waking up to the real world again, falling back to the ground as the rest of them surround her in relief. They saved Max. The California crew get a number from Harmon, who tells them to warn Owens and that Eleven's in danger, but that they're at something called Nina. He passes them a pen telling them that it's a number, and dies in the back of a van. The military check around the buyer's house and find a note from 11 to Mike, and goes to Wallace, who's still alive and confronts him about her location. 11, however, wakes up as they arrive to the doorway in the middle of nowhere. They head down an elevator and arrive at a secret facility. They walk through the hallways, seeing other scientists surprised to see her. It's almost like a mini lab down there. And they walk all the way to the Nina machine. She asks what it is, but Dr. Brenner walks out and tells her that they can't ruin the surprise. They reunite briefly, calling them the daughter and Papa duo, before 11 runs away. She tries to get out, but the guards at the front grab her and they put her to sleep as Dr. Brenner holds her. Back at Reefer Rick's, Eddie requests a food delivery from the rest of the crew, but Nancy doesn't see Max and immediately hangs up. She wakes up the sleeping Dustin and they rush to find Max, who's just drawing in the kitchen. Max draws out what she saw in her vision and Nancy puts together an image of a house, Victor Creel's house. Within Nina, 11 is forced to revisit her memories and has to act as she did when she was younger within the lab. The California crew dig a grave to hide the agent's body, and when Argyle realizes the pen doesn't work, they wonder why he'd give out a dead pen, and they realize the numbers within it. They call the number and figure out they're calling a computer, so they plan to head to Susie to get her help to get the location of Nina. Joyce and Murray try to cut themselves out with a Jif glass, but Yuri sees them doing so and Murray fights him with his karate skills, as he's a black belt. He defeats Yuri, but the plane begins falling, so they try their best to fly the plane, or at least they themselves land safely, which they don't do too well. Back in Nina, 11 struggling as her memories are mixing with one another. At Eddie's trailer, agents arrive and look around, seeing the crack in the roof, but they know what that is and move Eddie's uncle out immediately. While at Chrissy's funeral, Patrick is hearing the clock chimes, and when the basketball team keep planning to find Eddie, he asks if they might have cursed him, but they just laugh it off. The whole team leaves to go find Eddie. The Hawkins crew arrive at the Creel house. After breaking in, they explore and see a grandfather clock. They decide to split into groups and go look for anything. The basketball team arrives at Reefer Rick's and checks around his house. Eddie calls the others who are currently investigating the house, but they see lights heading in the park. They follow the lights all the way to the attic. The basketball team searches everywhere but sees the boathouse outside open. After Patrick hears the clock again and snaps out of it, they head to investigate, and the boat is missing. Eddie rows the boat away as he gets caught, and they swim towards him. Back in the Creel house, their lights begin shining too bright, as in the upside down, Vecna is raised, connecting himself to Patrick. As Jason gets closer, Patrick stops swimming, as he hears the clock. He sinks in the water but then gets raised in the air. Eddie falls into the water as Patrick's bones begin cracking, which causes the flashlights to break in the Creel house, as Patrick's jaw bursts and he falls into the water. In Nina, 11 awakens and strikes Dr. Brenner. She runs out hoping to escape, hitting the elevator. When agents grab her, she screams and her powers return, blasting the agents away from her. Dr. Brenner comes to her but 11 threatens to use her powers against him, so she tries but it doesn't work. They aren't coming back so easily. The elevator opens and 11 has a choice to make, but she wants to regain her powers to save her friends. So she grabs Dr. Brenner's hand and they walk to Nina to continue their work. Officers arrive, seeing Jason holding Patrick's body. Jason talks to the police, convinced Eddie has the devil's powers. Agent Wallace is getting tortured and will continue to be until he reveals 11's location. 11 is resting in her room as Dr. Brenner explains that her memories were messed up from the bite last year, and he explains how it will all work, that she just needs to remember. He has all the videotapes from the lab and he explains how Nina helps her not only see her memories but experience them, but she goes back into Nina. Eddie steals a walkie-talkie as Roman tells the Hawkins crew that they're all screwed, but when they arrive at Reefer Rick's, they see the police making a news report, and Eddie is officially confirmed as a suspect to the public. Eddie radios to them and tells them that he's at Skull Rock, so they all instantly go and head there. The California crew arrive at Susie's and witness absolute madness within the household. They find Susie outside messing with Cerebro, and they tell her they're Dustin's friends and ask for her help. They all lie to Susie that it's a top secret console for Dustin's birthday, and that they need to head out to the location that's hidden within the clue. They get the location of Nina, printing it out, and they go to leave, when they discover Argyle smoking weed with Susie's sister. Yuri gets threatened by Joyce and Murray, so he reluctantly agrees to help them, while Hopper and the other prisoners think they're about to fight something, until they're led to a different room to have a large feast. Their first good meal since they arrived. But when they start talking about the monster, Hopper guesses its height and the fact that it has white pale skin with no face and no eyes. The other inmate wonders how he knows this, and Hopper tells him that he's fought one before, and explains the Demogorgon to them, and how this meal isn't to give them energy, it's to make them a better snack for the beast. This is their last supper. Joyce and Hopper are led by Yuri to a city and enter Yuri's safe house. They find guns and threaten Yuri more, until he shows them how to get to the prison. Yuri doesn't care anymore, as he knows they'll die on the way in. Their new plan though is Mari acts as Yuri, and Yuri brings the two Americans in just like he said he would. Back in Russia, they're about to fight the beast until Hopper hits and has a fight with Dmitri. He knocks out a soldier in the crossfire and steals something from the guard. They get given more time to recharge, and Hopper tells him the Demogorgon's weakness. He shows Dmitri the fluids he stole from the sup and lighter he stole from the guard. The compass doesn't match with Steve's memory, so he takes them a different direction, where they eventually make it to Skull Rock and find Eddie. Eddie's name is shared a lot at the town hall, where the public are able to ask police questions. Before they continue, Jason walks in and starts talking about how the Hellfire Club is Eddie's satanic cult. He says the Moorfire and all the unexplained deaths were because of that cult. Erica interrupts, saying it's just a club for nerds, but Jason says it's all a lie, and that they must cast out the evil. Everyone in the town hall goes to find Eddie, and the Wheelers, Henderson, and Sinclairs all head to the Wheelers' house, as that's where they were just before, but they don't see them in the basement. All the parents don't know what to do, and Karen calls the police to tell them that if they find them, to bring them there. Back at Skull Rock, they all combine information and know Vector attacks from the crew house, and they just need to find a way into the Upside Down to kill Vector somehow. Dustin, however, figures out that he was right. The compasses are wrong. Try and remember, what breaks a compass? A large electromagnetic field, and the last time that happened, it was a gate. They realize there may be a smaller gate somewhere else that they just haven't noticed. So after Eddie agrees, they all go and follow the compass's false direction. Everyone in town is hunting the kids that night. The Hawkins crew head through the bushes and realize the magnet points somewhere in the water. There's a gate in Lover's Lake. Maybe Vecna does the same thing as the Demogorgon, leaving a small gate when it attacks. They find Eddie's boat, and Steve, Nancy, Robin, and Eddie get in the boat and head out to the water. They row until the compass goes nuts. They're directly above it, so Steve readies to go under. He dives under the water and sees dead fish, but when he turns he sees a red glow in the distance. He swims towards it as the police are closing in on the crew. Steve sees the gate, randomly in the middle of the water. He goes to touch it, but a vine hits it from the other side, so Steve instantly swims up. Robin tells the others they found the gate as Max, Dustin, and Lucas distract the officers and take them far from Eddie. In the water, Steve gets pulled down randomly but back up, and then pulled down again. He gets dragged down the water, heads all the way to the gate, and eventually goes straight through it, popping out on the other side. Nancy jumps down as Steve gets pulled around in the Upside Down, and Dustin, then the rest, get caught by police. Eventually Robin follows, and then reluctantly Eddie also goes in. Within the Upside Down, Steve observes the red lightning in the landscape around him, until he sees and hears demo bats flying right towards him. Not just one, but multiple. So he runs and grabs a rowing paddle, hitting and fighting off the bats, until he gets strangled by one and the others begin to bite him. He tries to get them off of him, but they keep biting over and over. Steve gets strangled and eaten alive until Nancy hits one of the paddle, and they fight the demo bats off. More arrive and Eddie even helps. Nancy gets attacked by one as Eddie fights off his demo bat, breaking the paddle. Steve bites one of them and holds it by its tail. He then throws it around as Eddie stabs his right in the face. Steve flings the demo bat around over and over before stepping on his demo bat and ripping it in two. They fight them off and plan to return back, but more demo bats guard the gate, stopping them from going back in, so they run straight for the woods. Officer Wallace reveals Eleven's location, as within Nina, they plan to go and watch the big event that happened in Eleven's past, so she returns to Nina one final time. Back in Hawkins, the police interrogate Dustin, Lucas, and Max at the Wheelers with all their parents. They lie multiple times since they had no preparation time to figure out a story, but that might work for the police, so Max gets pulled away individually. In the Upside Down, they need weapons to attack it, so they can re-enter through the gate. So Nancy tells them about her guns, instead of going all the way downtown and wasting more time. But earthquakes are happening constantly. Something is going on that hasn't happened before. But what? Either way, they all head to the Wheelers. The Upside Down group arrive at the Wheelers, and on the other side, Dustin and Lucas tell Erica what's going on, about the new Upside Down occurrences. They wonder why the gate opened up in the first place. The last two gates were opened on our end, one by 11 making a psychic connection to the Upside Down, and one by the Russians with a machine. Dustin explains how maybe Vecna is making a psychic connection to all the victims, creating multiple gates all around instead of having just one, and they'd be making multiple gates for the Mind Flare to take over the world. In the Upside Down, they enter the house. Steve thinks he hears talking from someone else as Nancy, Robin, and Eddie head upstairs for our guns, but there aren't any there. Nancy notices how she threw away the shoes years ago, and that her chemistry cards from sophomore year are there, and how the wallpaper is old and the mirror went to yard sale. Nancy thinks and grabs her diary, reading through it, and finds the entries end on November 6, 1983. They're in the past. The Upside Down is frozen in time from the first time the permanent gate opened, the first time Will went missing. This is a huge discovery to them, but they hear Steve shouting for Dustin, as on the other side, they're talking right in the same spot. Nancy remembers the lights Will used to communicate, and they all see that the lights are emitting some sort of energy bubble around them. Nancy goes to touch the bubble, and in the real world the light brightens. When she removes her hand, the light faints away to normal. Nancy realizes they can use Morse code. Dustin, Lucas, and Erica realizes that the light is flickering, as Eddie is spelling out SOS in Morse. Dustin realizes this and realizes that they are in the Upside Down. They grab Holly's light bright and take it to Nancy's room. They turn it on and it creates an energy bubble in the Upside Down. It works perfectly and they unplug it. The energy bubble stays there as they continue to communicate communicate to them cross-dimension. They tell them they're stuck in Watergate's guarded, but Dustin tells them how there might be a gate at every one of Vecna's murder sites. So they all sneak out, grab their bikes, and begin to head to Eddie's trailer. Erica pops the tire and the parents all gather at the front of the house, watching as their kids ride away into the night. The kids ride in the real world, making their way fast, as in the Upside Down they're all in the same position and making their way. But a Demobat sees them all riding in the Upside Down, and thanks to the hive mind, Vecna is notified. Mario arrives at the prisoner's Yuri, showing off the Americans that the warden wanted, and they successfully enter into the prison grounds. Within the prison, Murray speaks to the warden, but the warden wants to put on a show for them and show them the caged fight. Joyce and Murray see Hopper, still alive. They begin the fight as the alarm goes off. They run and grab weapons individually, giving Hopper a spear. Hopper covers it with a piece of flammable cloth, as the gate holding the monster back opens up. Hopper pours lighting fluid all over the spear and cloth, and Murray threatens the warden. Hopper tries to light it, but it doesn't light. The Demogorgon bursts through the darkness and attacks the prisoners, knocking all of them down one by one, smacking their skulls against the wall and more. Murray tells the warden to get every guard to shoot it, but that he can't do that or else he's a dead man himself. Hopper finally lights it as Dimitri's weapon breaks. Hopper can successfully push the Demogorgon away, but someone tries to climb out of the pit, so the Demogorgon runs around and knocks him down, eating his head. Murray takes the warden to the control room and tells everyone there to open the doors. The Demogorgon finishes up the other prisoners besides Hopper and Dimitri. The Russian doesn't open anything, so Murray knocks them all out with his karate skills as the Demogorgon kills one final person, but it's still hungry. It heads towards Hopper, but Hopper keeps fighting it off with the fire. The Demogorgon gets a hit while it tries to extinguish the fire. Joyce clicks random buttons, messing up the electricity, and then opens the door. Dimitri gets through the door and Hopper does the same while holding it back. Joyce shuts the door as Hopper's flame runs out. The Demogorgon, however, doesn't want to lose. It pushes the gate open itself and screams as Hopper spears the Demogorgon right in its throat, which knocks the Demogorgon away and the door is shut. Another door opens and Hopper walks through, ready to fight, but instead sees Joyce and Murray. Hopper and Joyce hug and embrace each other. Back within the Upside Down, they arrive at Eddie's. They see the gate and it opens up completely. They look to see what's through it and they see that the kids are looking up at them while they look up at the kids. They grab Eddie's mattress and put it down as a landing pad. They grab a piece of the curtain and test the physics going through the gate. It goes in between perfectly and Dustin figures out he can just let go and it will hold in position. Robin pulls on it and they realize it still holds no matter what. Robin climbs out first and pops out on the other side. Next, Eddie starts climbing out until he also pops out on the other side. Nancy is next and she starts to climb out until she pops out in the void. She falls through the darkness, through the empty abyss, and eventually lands. She stands up and realizes she's in Barb's pool. Steve tries to wake Nancy up as now Nancy is in a trance, and everyone on the other side sees her frozen still. Nancy sees Barb's body as Vecna talks to her about Barb. Nancy arrives in Vecna's mindscape, and Vecna shows her how truly close they were to the truth. He shows her his entire story. At the same time, Eleven is rediscovering the truth about what happened at the lab. Outside of Nina, Dr. Brenner and Dr. Owen see that it's working, and Eleven regains her powers as she reenacts herself, sending Henry into the Upside Down, like she did so many years ago. Now Nancy is caught up with the truth, Vecna begins terrorizing her. She runs away, trying to escape the vision. In reality, the entire group is trying to find any music to help Nancy, as she finds herself at a dead end. Vecna himself appears, which causes her to try and speed up. She eventually gets through the door, only to be back at the start of her vision. The lights flicker off and back on, but now she's tied to a chair by Vecna's tentacles. Vecna confronts her, telling Nancy to tell Eleven everything she sees through her vision. A vision full of gates expanding and spreading all over and destroying Hawkins as the clocks chime. Nancy snaps out of it and falls to the ground. The Demogorgon is pissed off, finally losing to someone. It climbs the cage and confronts the prison guards. It screeches and they all shoot it, but eventually they run out of bullets, so it goes and kills them all. The Russian group hears noises coming from a room above them, so they go and investigate, only to see a Demodog tied to a chair being dissected. It screams and screams until Hopper puts it out of its misery. Hopper opens a curtain only to see multiple Demodogs and tanks, and last but not least, a piece of the mind flare going in circles. Dimitri finds a vent, so they all climb down it to escape the prison. Eleven's pulse is dropping. She's waking up from being knocked out. Eleven gets herself up and heads towards Nina. She shuts her eyes and tries to use her powers. It works as she successfully lifts Nina into the air. She has her powers back. Outside, on their way to Nina, Will and Mike have an emotional talk. Will shows Mike the painting he's been working on and carrying around, and it's of the Demogorgon fighting their party from their Dungeons & Dragons campaign they played on the night Will went missing, the night the Upside Down event started. Will talks about things like Eleven needing Mike no matter what, but it seems as though Will is talking less about Eleven and more about himself as he cries into his hands, which Jonathan notices. Back inside Nina, Dr. Brenner explains her coma and talks about how Henry's back. Dr. Brenner explains how Henry is trying to crack the barrier between our two dimensions, and that if he succeeds, Hawkins will fall. Eleven goes to her room to enter the void in order to see if her friends are safe. Nancy explains everything she saw in her vision, and they realize that there only needs to be 4 gates open before his plan is over. He's only 1 kill away. The pressure of the entire world falls onto them at that moment. Eleven sees him in the void talking about it and how much danger they're in. Nancy plans how they're going to go back in the Upside Down to go and kill Vecna. Dustin remembers that Eleven's weakness is that she goes into a trance-like state when she remote travels. The body will be left defenseless if Vecna attacks, only leaving the bats, so they'll need a distraction for the bats. They don't know who he will attack next, but Max does. It's her. She tells him all that she'll drop Kate Bush so he attacks her, and she'll just need to survive long enough for them to kill Vecna. They all plan to head to the war zone to get their weapons and supplies for their mission, so they steal a stranger's van and head there immediately. After Eleven hears all of their plans, she rushes to Dr. Owens, telling him that her friends aren't safe. He calms her down and decides to send people to Hawkins for Max, but Eleven says she wants to be the one sent herself. Dr. Brenner says her friends and her aren't prepared for the fight, that she needs to stay there and keep training, that she must not leave. But Dr. Owens tells her that she does have a choice no matter what Brenner says, and Eleven makes her choice to return back to Hawkins. Back in Russia, they escape the prison and they all convince Yuri to get a flight back to America. They arrive at Yuri's safe house and see a helicopter, and they instantly think they're all doomed. Will it even be able to fly to America, let alone at all? They decide to call Dr. Owens to get a flight out of there, but they have to wait for a call back from them themselves. The Hawkins group arrive at the war zone and gather weapons and supplies. While purchasing a gun, Nancy runs into Jason. Turns out the entire basketball team is here as well. Jason confronts Nancy about Mike and the fact he's in Hellfire. He asks if he's there with her or if any of her friends are there either, but Nancy ignores the questions, telling him to let her gun go. They all re-enter the van and drive away from the store straight away. The California crew arrive at Nina's coordinates but don't find anything there. They check their calculations again, but Argyle finds tire tracks starting from where they were that head off-road in a certain direction. They all realize that those tires must be big, so they must be military. So they prepare to follow the tracks as the military head to Nina. Dr. Owen's phone call gets interrupted as the Nina guards confront him. Eleven goes to see Nina before leaving, thinking to herself, but gets locked inside the room. Dr. Brenner confronts her, telling her that she can't leave. He got the guards to hurt Dr. Owens and lock him up. If she leaves, they'll kill Owens. Eleven confronts Dr. Brenner about how much of a monster he is, and she decides to push the door open with her powers. But before she can leave, Dr. Brenner uses a syringe to put Eleven to sleep. She knocks him away, but it's too late. She begins to hurt him, but she starts to fade out more and more until she drops Dr. Brenner as she gets knocked out. The Hawkins group make shields, sawn-off shotguns, spears, and molotovs. They all prepare themselves in practice, as Steve and Robin talk about their situation and how they have to try. Eleven wakes up in a room collared by Dr. Brenner, but the alarms go off as the military has found them. They head to the door and blow it right open and head down the elevator. They get in and both the military and the Nina military have a shoot-off. Dr. Brenner takes Eleven away and up the stairs. Sullivan finds Dr. Owens and confronts him about Eleven's location. Eleven and Dr. Brenner reach the top, but Brenner gets shot by a soldier in a helicopter. They knock Brenner down, and when he tries to get back up, they shoot him straight through the gut. Eleven sees him knocked out and they prepare to shoot Eleven. They contact Sullivan and ask for permission to shoot, but Owens asks them about a fair deal, to put Eleven in a coma and see if the murders keep happening, and if they don't, they'll really need Eleven. But he doesn't listen and gives permission to take the shot, so they prepare to shoot until they hear horns honking, only to see the California crew in their pizza truck heading towards her. They ignore the truck and go to aim at Eleven, but she's now standing up, aiming at them, and she starts using her powers against them, spinning them around and then eventually using both of her hands to force them to the ground. The California crew reunite with Eleven and they all hug, but after hugging Will, her collar is deactivated and unlocked. Dr. Brenner is barely alive. She walks to him and they talk about how proud of her he is. And he asks her if she understands that all he wanted to do was to help and protect Eleven. All he did was for her. But she doesn't agree to forgive him, putting his hand down and getting into the pizza van. They all drive away as the military head to the top, seeing them escape. Dr. Brenner sees them leaving and going far away, so he gives in to his pain and dies. This time, properly. Eleven tells them that they need to head to Hawkins as soon as possible or else they'll die. As in Hawkins, the group will dreadfully prepare themselves for the mission ahead, all preparing themselves for war. Max, Lucas, and Erica get out the van at the Creel house. They prepare themselves and head in. Nancy goes over the plan for the Upside Down group, that they don't move on to the next phase without everyone signing off on it, and no one deviates from the plan, no matter what. They all head back into Eddie's trailer and Steve goes into the Upside Down, landing professionally. He grabs a mattress for them all to enter safely. Nancy goes in and they chuck her gun down. Eddie enters and they chuck his shield down. Robin enters and they chuck their spears down. Then finally Dustin enters and they all go to begin their plan to kill Vecna, once and for all. The California crew try and get a flight to Hawkins immediately, but keep getting denied. 11 realizes that they don't have to though, that she can enter Max's mind when Vecna enters hers, and have a mind fight. But they need a lot of salt for a sensory deprivation tank, and after Argyle does some measurements, he confirms he knows where to go for salt. Back in Hawkins, the crew house group finds Vecna's location, so Erica heads to the playground to use her flashlight in order to create an energy bubble in the Upside Down. But a stranger who originally left to help Jason sees them, and Jason now knows where the Hawkins crew are. In Russia, Yuri purposely sabotages the plane. Hopper and Joyce talk about their date and kiss for the very first time. The phone rings and Hopper picks up. Hopper tells him how 11 told him on the phone about how Owens is with a girl to fight off some evil in Hawkins, but they all went off grid, and that the California group is with her. They all know exactly what this means. That 11 is with the other kids in Owens to go and fight the Upside Down in Hawkins. Joyce puts together the fact that a gate is open in Hawkins, and they realize they don't have to make it there in time. They know that part of the hive mind is in Russia, so they can go and kill everything in order to give the kids the upper hand. So they decide to break back into the prison and plan. Dimitri goes to get Yuri in line to pick them back up when they need it, and Hopper finds a flamethrower to use in the prison. The California group arrives at another Surfer Boys pizza. Argyle talks to the guy at the front about how they need his kitchen, but he's going to go meet someone at Taco Bell in 10 minutes, so he wouldn't be able to lend them it. But Jonathan convinces him to give them the kitchen with the purple palm tree delight. He leaves and they all prepare the tub for the kitchen, while the Upside Down crew barricades Eddie's trailer as Argyle makes pizza. In the Upside Down, they finish and go and grab Eddie's guitar for their part of the plan, as Steve, Nancy, and Robin arrive at the crew house. The Russian group breaks into the prison, noticing no one's at the front gate. They open the vent and head inside, as Dimitri talks to Yuri about how before losing money to cards and drinks, Yuri once led his men to victory over the Chinese in Demansky, and eventually convinces Yuri to get in line. Lucas and Max talk using paper, as they can't alert Vecna to their whereabouts, and Lucas takes the opportunity to ask about watching a movie on Friday, which Max agrees to. Erica lights to them that the Upside Down group has arrived at the energy bubble. They light back and Erica talks to the Upside Down crew about how they're moving on to the next phase, distracting Vecna. Max turns off running up that hill and yells for Vecna to hear. She tells him to attack her and they follow the light as Vecna begins moving up the stairs. Mike prepares 11 glasses to block out any vision, and after 11 likes the taste, Argyle tries to make Mike try pepperoni on pizza, while Jonathan and Will talk about how they should talk more like they used to. Jonathan tells Will that no matter what, he'll always love him because he's always going to be his brother, and they hug. They finish the tub and 11 prepares herself and enters the void. She sees Lucas and Max arriving at the basement as the light fully brightens. Vecna is there. When the light fades, Max decides to put her headphones to the side and talk about how she's been feeling, that she prayed for something bad to happen to Billy, and that she stood there because she didn't know if he deserved to be saved, and that now she prays something bad happens to her. After talking, Lucas confronts Max, asking if she thinks the same things about him, and he tells her that she's sick. She realizes that Vecna is here, and he tells Max that she's now the chosen one, that she'll be the one to break the world. Max is now under the trance, and 11 knows Vecna is in her head. Max hits Vecna in the head and runs away from him. 11 holds Max's hands in the void and closes her eyes, searching her past of happy memories to try and fully enter her mind. She succeeds and arrives at a skate park. Lucas communicates to Erica that she's in the trance, so she tells the others and Robin contacts Dustin to begin phase 3. So Dustin connects the amp and Eddie uses his guitar to start playing Master of Puppets by Metallica, which grabbed the Demobat's attention. So the rest head over to the Creel house as back in Max's vision she runs away from Vecna, running into dead ends. Jason sees Erica and they turn into the playground. Erica begins running away until Andy tackles her as Max is shown a vision of Billy during the sauna test. Dustin prepares Eddie to finish in 30 seconds as Max searches and tries to control her mind, remembering her happiest memories. In the vision, Billy opens the door, and as Eddie finishes the guitar solo, Max successfully travels to the snowball. Eddie and Dustin quickly head back inside the van, and after locking it up, celebrate. Back in Russia, they eventually arrive into the prison and find a dying guard who tells them that the other guards shot the other trapped Demodogs free by accident while trying to kill the Demogorgon, and that their shadow is now on all the monsters. In the Upside Down, they head into the Creel house and begin traveling it, while trying to avoid setting off the hive mind. 11 in the void tries to look for anything wrong in the memory, and finds the snowball memory leaking into that memory. At the snowball, the balloons start popping blood as the music turns to Dream Little Dream of Me as Vecna starts to take over. Lucas tries contacting Erica, but Jason arrives upstairs. He immediately tries to help Max, trying to wake her up and save her. Lucas tries to stop him from waking her up, so Jason aims a gun at him to stop him from doing anything. He tells Lucas to save Max or else he'll put a bullet through his head. In the prison, they plan for Hopper to be the bait and lure the Demogorgons and Demodogs there, making Joyce shut the doors on them so then Murray can burn them all down. Hopper finds which one he's going towards and they begin their plan. While in the Upside Down, Dustin and Eddie listen to the Demobats going around, and they realize that there's a small vent on the roof. The Demobats knock open the vent, so Dustin and Eddie scream and they begin stabbing the Demobats over and over. While traveling the house and steps away from the attack on Vecna, an earthquake occurs, and vines grab and then trap Robin. Nancy and Steve try and save Robin, but vines trap Steve, and then eventually trap Nancy. In a matter of seconds, they're all stuck in the vines, choking. Hopper alerts a Demodog and begins running, as the Demodog breaks open the door and begins its hunt. In the Upside Down, Eddie uses his shield to stab the Demobats off and block off the vent entirely. They rest for moments, but then realize there's more vents, so they go to close it off, but countless Demobats break through and enter. They slam the door shut and begin to head into the real world. Dustin enters successfully and Eddie starts to climb, only to stop himself and fall back down on his own accord. He cuts the curtain and moves the mattress so Dustin can't climb back through. Eddie runs out and gets on one of the bikes, beginning to lure the bats away. Within Max's vision, Vecna attacks and pushes Max to the wall to stop her from being able to leave, as Lucas explains Vecna to Jason. They talk about Chrissy and Jason gives Lucas 5 seconds to wake Max up before he shoots. But Lucas dodges the shot and knocks Jason over as Andy hears the gunshot, distracting him enough for Erica to hit him in the balls and then with her flashlight. Jason and Lucas fight within the house, causing Jason to break the headphones. Vecna steps to Max and reaches for her. He goes to kill her but gets pushed away and into the air as Eleven turns him around to see her. Eleven flings him through the seats while Eddie keeps luring the bats away, and Dustin tries to re-enter the Upside Down and makes a large leap for it while the Demobats knock Eddie off his bike as Dustin falls from the portal, dislocating his leg. Eddie stops running away and turns to the Demobats, preparing himself to fight. The Demobats all head towards him and Eddie blocks their charge. Within the prison, while Hopper is getting chased, Joyce sees a shocking device, as within Hawkins, Lucas gets a few hits on Jason until Jason uses glass to knock Lucas away. Within Max's vision, Eleven talks to her, but they hear Vecna returning. Vecna and Eleven face each other and prepare to fight. Vecna uses a bunch of wood to attack Eleven, but she deflects it, only for Vecna to push her away and drag her around with no effort whatsoever. Dustin in pain sees a swarm of bats around Eddie, as he's fighting them all off. He successfully gets a few hits and asks for more, as Vecna heads towards Eleven. Max runs to him, but he nudges her aside in an instant. Eleven tries to push him away, but Vecna catches her and makes her rise. He brings her towards him, and after talking about how he wants her to watch what happens, he pushes her all the way into his mindscape. Vines grab Eleven and hoist her up on the creel house door, as she watches Max get hoisted herself. Eleven yells out about Papa's death, which stops Vecna for a moment. He heads to her and they talk about how Papa is the monster, but Vecna denies this and claims that he's just a man who sought greatness in others, and he tells her that everything that's happened is thanks to her opening the gate between the worlds. But now Vecna is taking it upon himself to do so. He tells Eleven they're all going to lose, as Hopper gets knocked down by a Demodog and Eddie starts getting strangled and then eaten by the Demobats, as Steve, Nancy and Robin are all getting strangled by the vines, and Jason is choking Lucas. Vecna heads towards Max and reaches for her, which causes her to levitate in the real world, which Lucas witnesses. The California crew grab Eleven out of the bath as she struggles to breathe. They lay her down on the table and Mike begins to talk to Eleven about how he loves her, but is too scared to say it in case she realizes she doesn't need him anymore, and says it will make that day hurt more. After the speech to Eleven, he yells for her to fight. She uses her powers to make the vines let her go slowly but surely, as Lucas knocks Jason's head into the window and he hits him once, twice, 3 times and then knocks him out. Vecna successfully grabs Max, which causes her body to begin snapping. Hopper is a moment away from being eaten by the Demodog, and Eddie coughs out blood as Dustin is rushing to help him. Vecna causes Max to snap her legs and arms, and she begins bleeding out of her eyes as Lucas screams. Eleven gets out the vines and screams, pushing Vecna away from Max with all of her strength as Joyce runs in and shocks the Demodog. Vecna hits one of his poles, which lets Max go, which causes Max to fall in the real world and makes the Demodog get off Hopper. But no rest as a Demogorgon and a Demodog head towards them. They run out and try getting in the cage, only for the Demogorgon to knock it out the way. But Murray calls out to the beast and begins flamethrowing them all, which causes Vecna immense pain and causes the Demobats to fall as Steve, Nancy and Robin are freed from the vines. They grab their weapons and prepare to go and kill Vecna, as there is one Demogorgon left to fight Hopper. Hopper shoots the Demogorgon, but it stands its ground. Hopper grabs the sword that's on the ground from the last fight and raises it as the Demogorgon prepares to fight. While in Vecna's mindscape, he tells Eleven how they think they've won, but they've already lost. Steve, Nancy and Robin prepare themselves to attack as they light a Molotov. The Demogorgon roars and Hopper heads towards it as Steve throws a Molotov. Hopper slices the Demogorgon's arm off as the Molotov hits Vecna directly, causing him and the vines to start burning, but also causing Eleven to be kicked out of his mind. Vecna falls as Max wakes. Vecna faces his enemies in rage and gets back up, as Robin lights another and throws it at him, directly hitting him once more. Nancy heads towards him and shoots him with a shotgun once, reloading and then hitting him again and again as Hopper dodges the Demogorgon's attack and slices its head clean off. Vecna screams and Nancy shoots one final time, pushing Vecna out of his house as the Demogorgon's head hits the ground and Vecna hits the ground himself. Dimitri and Yuri arrive in the helicopter to save Hopper, Joyce, and Mari, as in the Upside Down they see that Vecna's disappeared as Dustin heads towards Eddie, who after exchanging emotional words and their friendly love for one another, dies in his arms. Erica gets inside the attic and Lucas tells her to call an ambulance. Max can't see or feel anything, horrified by what's gonna happen. She doesn't want to die. Lucas screams for help, but Max quiets as her eyes close, and she dies in Lucas's arms. This emotional time is immediately disrupted as the clock begins to chime. It chimes and the earthquake occurs, as upstairs a gate opens. The gate spreads throughout the house, ripping Jason's body in half and destroying the house entirely. The gate in Eddie's trailer also spreads itself out. Patrick's gate spreads itself out as Fred's gate in the water spreads itself out. Hawkins falls as the gate continues to spread more and more until eventually meeting in the middle. In the void, Eleven sees Max dead, but doesn't want it to happen. So she puts her arm on Max's heart and tries to use her powers all the way from California to Hawkins in order to make it beat once more. 2 days later, everyone leaves Hawkins as the California group arrives, seeing the destruction of their town left by the gates. The Hawkins group pack their car full of donations, but get interrupted by the pizza van, and after a long week, both groups finally reunite with each other. They talk about everything and eventually head to the hospital where Lucas is reading out to Max, who's laying in the hospital bed completely out of it while her heart continues to beat. They reunite and Lucas explains what's happening. Eleven goes and sits with Max, holding her hand and trying to contact her through the void. Eleven enters Max's mind only to see nothing there. Max is seemingly brain dead. There is nothing there. Steve, Justin, and Robin give their donations and ask to help more. Robin meets Vicky and they begin talking, learning Vicky is no longer with her boyfriend and they bond as Steve watches with joy. Justin, however, meets Eddie's Uncle Wayne and tells him how he was with Eddie when the earthquake hit. He then pulls out Eddie's necklace and gives it to Wayne, telling him how he's dead, that he died a hero, fighting until the end for a town that hated him. Mike, Will, Eleven, Jonathan, Nancy, and Argyle arrive at Hopper's old and destroyed cabin. They all help clean it up, and as Eleven heads into her old room to clean, Mike and Will sit down to talk. Mike hopes Vecna is dead, but Will says he's not. Now he's in Hawkins, his connection to the Upside Down has returned. He knows Vecna is alive, and he knows he won't stop until he's taken everything and everyone. Mike promises they will kill him, but they hear a government car outside. Inside her room, Eleven hears someone approaching the door, only for Hopper to be the one who opens it. Eleven instantly starts tearing up and they reunite, hugging each other after so long apart. They talk about their new looks and they hear Joyce outside, so they head outside, seeing Joyce, and Eleven goes and hugs her. Mike and Hopper reunite and hug it out. While they're all getting back on their feet, Will gets goosebumps on his neck. They all begin to see the sky turning darker, and everyone witnesses as the Upside Down spores float from the sky. The whole town sees the spores. Lucas and Erica know what this means. Steve and Robin know what this means, and Dustin knows what this means. The rest travel the woods to see the view of their town, and they see as the flowers and plants are dying. They all see the Upside Down reaching into Hawkins, the shadow now fully entering through. Mike and Will are stunned, as Jonathan and Nancy are fearful, and Hopper and Joyce hold hands, knowing it's not over. Eleven stares into the distance, watching as the Upside Down invades Hawkins. This is only the beginning of the end.